She wanted to make her ex jealous. She accidentally became Mafia property. That was the whole plan. Show up hotter, stronger, and happier than the man who dumped her ever expected. Clean, petty, effective. But fate took one look at that plan and said, "Oh, Lamas, not enough chaos." Because the fake boyfriend was Adrian Moretti, a man with enemies, blood on his hands, and enough emotional damage to ruin everybody in a 5-mile radius. So now Emily isn't just winning a breakup. She's standing next to a man people are actively trying to kill. And somehow that's the first time in her life she's ever felt truly seen.
The case file opens with an act of calculated self-destruction. Subject: Emily Carter, with hands exhibiting fine motor tremors, initiates contact with the city's apex predator. She presents a proposal that functions less as a strategy and more as a meticulously constructed psychological test. The terms: his portrayal as her consort at the wedding of the individual who precipitated her psychological collapse. The subject had been subjected to narcissistic discard, public humiliation, and social erasure, leaving her with a familial artifact, a single desperate hypothesis, and a psyche that resisted complete fragmentation. She could not anticipate that the target, Adrian Moretti, a master of clandestine power structures, would perceive in her trauma a resonance with his own pathology, a recognition that would prove more unsettling than any external threat. If this analysis has found its way to you, I ask you to note its point of discovery. I am interested to learn how far the subject's initial psychiatric reverberations are propagating tonight. And should a prognosis on this gambit be required, your validation of this document will suffice for me to continue. The Crimson Lounge. Observation confirms it is not a sanctuary for subjects experiencing psychic distress. It is a controlled environment for predation where the value of inanimate objects exceeds that of human life, and powerful psychopaths negotiate transactions in ambient light. Within this ecosystem, one's role is binary: predator or prey for the collective. Subject Emily Carter presented as a behavioral anomaly. Her hesitation at the threshold, her attire inadequate for a November chill that mirrored her own effective blunting, betrayed the somatic burden of every covert analytical gaze. A hostess whose posture demonstrated flawless somatic control and whose smile projected a coldness capable of extinguishing affect, intercepted her with the authority of a clinical gatekeeper. "My apologies, miss, but access is restricted to approved individuals." A xerostomia response was noted in the subject's throat. She had rehearsed this confrontation repeatedly during transit, yet when faced with the actual variable, her prepared script proved psychologically fragile. "I am here for an evaluation with Adrian Moretti." The hostess's facial expression remained a mask of professional neutrality, but a predatory gleam in her eyes served as a clear behavioral warning. "Mr. Moretti does not receive subjects without a prior scheduled assessment, I am aware." The subject's vocal tone was a thin filament of calm, contradicting the autonomic storm within her chest. "However, I possess an object he will find of significant interest." As predicted, the hostess's smile became more pronounced. "You may leave it with his associate, as do all other supplicants." The subject experienced the onset of a recurring delusion of invisibility, the familiar psychosomatic pressure bearing down. For 3 months, she had been a non-entity, at her vocation, in her domicile, and within the psyche of the man who had derealized her. A deep somatic exhaustion permeated her being. "Please convey to him," she stated, extracting a small velvet container from her coat, "that I am presenting a proposition." The hostess's gaze fixated on the object before returning to the subject's determined expression. A significant duration of silence followed. Finally, the woman raised a single, well-groomed hand, signaling a figure from the darker recesses. He materialized from the shadows, a large man whose suit represented a monetary value exceeding her housing costs. He remained silent, his gaze conducting a detached, methodical scan of her entire person. She indicates she has an object for Mr. Moretti, the hostess reported. The large male extended a hand. After a moment of cognitive delay, the subject surrendered the velvet container. He opened it with clinical disinterest, assessed the contents for less than 3 seconds, and closed it with an emphatic sound. Remain here. He withdrew into the facility's dark interior, taking her last tangible hope with him. Thus, she stood and waited. The hostess resumed her station, dismissing the subject with the practiced detachment of an institution that metabolizes desperation. 2 males departed the lounge, their subdued laughter fading behind them. They emitted the scent of high-cost ethanol and narcissistic entitlement, their gazes passing through her as if she were a transparent medium. The subject began to mark time via her own cardiac rhythm. 57 beats had elapsed when the large man reappeared. He will grant you 5 minutes. She followed his formidable structure through a labyrinthine series of corridors, past sealed doors containing information she was psychologically better off not knowing. The auditory stimulus of music receded, replaced by a profound, anticipatory silence. He paused at an unmarked door, knocked twice, then moved aside. 5 minutes, he reiterated. The subject's hand grasped the doorknob before her executive function could veto the sheer irrationality of her behavior. She rotated it and entered. The room was smaller, more intimate than her projections. A large window framed the city's illuminated grid, but the ambient light was so minimal the vista resembled a static image of a remote world. The space contained a desk, 2 chairs, and the man occupying it, who did not alter his focus as she entered. Adrian Moretti. A name circulated in media reports, a face widely recognized. Yet no photograph had managed to capture the sheer psychological weight of his presence, the phenomenon of the very atmosphere seeming to distort around him. He appeared to be approximately 35, with dark hair of excessive length, severe facial architecture, and a countenance that would be striking were it not for its complete lack of effective display. He placed the velvet box on the desk, propelled it across the polished surface. And then his gaze met hers. His irises were the color of slate, not gray or blue, but the flat, cold hue of a weather system, of a material that has never been exposed to sunlight. You have 4 minutes remaining, he said. His voice was a low, steady frequency, entirely devoid of interest. Utilize them. Without seeking permission, Emily occupied the seat opposite him. It was a minor act of defiance, but one she required to affirm her own agency, to claim space in a reality attempting to expel her. My name is Emily Carter. 3 months ago, my fiancé terminated our engagement in favor of a more strategically valuable union orchestrated by his family. She maintained eye contact with Adrian, scanning for any micro-expression. None was detected. The event is scheduled in 2 weeks. I received an invitation. How celebratory. Adrian's vocal tone was so devoid of inflection he could have been citing meteorological data. I fail to see the relevance of this information to me. I require an escort. That finally elicited a response from him. It was almost imperceptible, the slightest elevation of one eyebrow, a movement that could signify anything from contempt to mild cognitive dissonance. You desire my presence as your guest at a wedding? I need you to corroborate the narrative that I am psychologically stable, that his actions did not induce a catastrophic breakdown, that I am not the pathological victim all observers presume me to be. So this is your high-functioning gambit. Infiltrate my establishment, present a familial artifact to a man with whom you have no history, and expect my compliance. A wave of vasomotor heat rose in the subject's neck, but her gaze remained fixed. My gambit was to locate the sole individual in this city who comprehends the experience of being systematically invalidated. Someone who understands that for survival, one must sometimes construct a narrative so potent it supplants reality. At this, a shift occurred in Adrian's stillness. There was no softening. That seemed psychologically impossible, but his attention intensified, as if her words had a tangible mass. You are aware of my identity, he stated. Not as a question. I am aware of what is salient. Then you are aware I do not engage with those who misappropriate my time. This is not an engagement. It is a transactional agreement. Emily gestured toward the box. My grandmother's sapphire ring, its estimated value is at least $20,000, likely higher. It constitutes payment for a single evening of your time. That is the agreement. You appear with me, you perform the role, and then we revert to being non-entities to one another. Adrian reclined in his chair, his stare so focused it felt like a physical pressure on her skin. She forced herself into a state of somatic stillness to meet that stare, to project a composure that was a complete fabrication. Why would you operate under the assumption I require a ring? He inquired at last. All individuals have an object of desire, including you. And what is it you believe I desire, Miss Carter? Emily paused. This was the final decision point. Her last opportunity to articulate an apology, retrieve her ring, and withdraw with the remnants of her self-respect. But she had already crossed a psychological threshold. Having breached the perimeter and occupied an unoffered seat, she was compelled to see the scenario through to its conclusion. I believe, she said, articulating each word with precision, that your entire existence is a construct of perception, of an aura of absolute control, of a legend so impervious that no one would consider challenging it. She allowed the statement to hang in the silence. I believe you understand better than anyone that the narrative people accept about you is your most powerful weapon, and I require a new narrative. I need them to observe a woman who did not merely survive, a woman who prevailed. For a long interval, Adrian remained motionless. Then, he picked up the case, opened it again, and this time, his focus was directed at the ring itself. The object was unassuming, a simple gold band with a small dark blue stone, devoid of ornamentation, an artifact whose value was derived from its history, not its material composition. This wedding, he said, his voice quiet, his eyes on the ring. What is the location? The Belmont Estate, approximately 1 hour from this position. And the groom's designation? Nathaniel Ashford. That name functioned as a key in a lock. Adrian's head moved upward, and for a brief moment a genuine spark of cognitive interest manifested in his gaze. Senator Ashford's offspring, correct. And you were contracted to marry him? For a period of 2 years? Adrian closed the case, setting it on the desk with quiet finality. When he looked at her again, his focus was so acute, Emily felt as if he were performing a psychological autopsy, examining every secret, every fabrication, every vulnerability she possessed. My attendance is mandated at a convocation of oligarchs, men whose affluence renders consequence obsolete. His vocal tone was a composite of threat and charm. I am to fabricate a history with an unknown, a plausible fiction presented in 2 weeks. For this exercise in duplicity, your offer is a pittance that fails to meet my ancillary expenses. For Emily, this signaled refusal. The plan's failure was total. I will undertake it, Adrian stated. Emily remained immobilized by the illogical reversal. I will, he confirmed, but on different terms. The velvet case returned to her across the mahogany. The ring is inconsequential. This was not a narrative of renewal, but an inverted Pygmalion scenario executed with the detached precision of vengeance. Adrian was no sculptor of beauty. He was a tactician assembling a weapon. His proposal was to engineer a living effigy of torment. Over 14 days, he would deconstruct her identity to erect a new one, a phantom designed to plague Nathaniel Ashford with the specter of his loss. His own objective was opaque, an unspoken alliance against a mutual antagonist. The arrangement was less a contract than a functional paradox. She had braced for dismissal, yet discovered an accomplice for her desperate scheme. A peculiar magnetism drew her toward the intellect systematically dismantling her. Though instinct dictated flight, the gravity of this hazardous pact proved inescapable. She could persist as a captive of her grief, or enter a Faustian pact with this cipher. Her choice was an insurrection against her own despondency. His residence became the primary conditioning environment, a monument to his control. It was a cold, minimalist fortress, an architectural extension of its owner. Within his domain, he outlined the initial terms of her capitulation. You will occupy the guest suite on the 2nd floor. It is fully equipped. The quiet edict eradicated any illusion of her agency. Her protests were dismissed with a cold logic that clarified the conditions. A flawless simulation demanded a subject under constant observation. Her life, her job, her apartment were classified as obstacles to be liquidated. His control was total, her acquiescence a given. The space felt increasingly constrictive. The subject rationalized the arrangement as tutelage, a denial of her confinement, but his dialectic was inescapable. He presented a binary choice: public humiliation as a victim, or a calculated triumph orchestrated by him. His strategy was framed as the optimal course for inducing severe psychological distress in Nathaniel Ashford. The tragedy was the perfect construction of his argument. She acquiesced, entering a gilded cage presented as a haven. The environment was impeccably antiseptic, devoid of emotional comfort. His initial directive came from the hall. Apparel arrives tomorrow. Rest. Protocol begins at 0600. The subject exhibited acute incredulity. At 0600 hours? His reply lacked affect. Does your itinerary contain a conflicting priority? When Emily turned to object, he had already vacated the space. She was a specimen in an opulent enclosure, a variable to a man who saw her as an equation. A message from her friend Maya violated the silence. So, did he eject you? Emily's typed response, he agreed, felt disconnected from reality, prompting the immediate follow-up. At what cost? The query was unanswerable. How does one articulate trading one's entire being to a cryptic billionaire for a fortnight? Submerged in his world of immense wealth, she felt adrift. Her sole option was evasion. I'll detail it tomorrow. It's complex. The featureless ceiling became a screen for her recent trauma, a surface displaying Nathaniel's rejection and the calculated cruelty of his wedding announcement. That act of humiliation had been masterful, yet now ensnared in Adrian Moretti's design, simultaneously a prison and a rescue. A dormant aspect of her psyche began to activate. A new resolve was crystallizing from the remnants of her despair. A state of imminent threat was now her baseline reality. Dawn was not a gradual event. It was a percussive knock on her door. It was not Adrian. A new operative in this power dynamic confronted her. The woman, aged approximately 50, was the embodiment of discipline, from her severe hairstyle to her rigid posture. Her gaze conducted a cool, detached assessment. "Mr. Moretti is expecting you," she announced. "I am Claudia." "I am the household manager. Be prepared in 15 minutes." The instruction was absolute. 14 minutes later, she entered a cavernous dining room where Adrian presided over a table set for 12. A figure of remote authority, he was a monarch in his own territory, acknowledging her only by glancing up from a digital tablet. "You have exceeded the time limit." "But the directive was 6. 6:14 is a deviation from 6. The remark was a clinical assertion of dominance. He motioned to a chair. "Be seated." As Claudia served a plate, he issued his next command. "Consume it." Her protest of having no appetite was met with clinical detachment. "Your emotional state is irrelevant. The body requires fuel." His gaze was unnerving, an analytical instrument monitoring her compliance. The observation phase concluded and the interrogation began. "Provide a profile of Nathaniel Ashford." Her request for clarification was denied with a demand for everything. The complete dossier, your shared history, his projected ambitions, the catalyst for his departure. The final point found its target and her composure destabilized. "It was a strategic alliance for his family," she stated, her voice flat and rehearsed. "I am a paralegal. He chose a politician's daughter. It was a logical decision." Adrian repeated the term, logical, as if it were a contaminant. That was the term he employed. "And you found this acceptable?" Her head lifted in a fleeting display of defiance, but he pressed his examination. "A man does not terminate a 2-year relationship for logic. He terminates it because it is concluded. Provide the primary cause." His assertion demolished her constructed reality. "He said I had become predictable," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "That I was like a comfortable, worn-out article of footwear." Her reliability had been the flaw, leaving no element of mystery. Adrian's face was a mask, but his eyes showed a flicker of clinical interest. "And you conceded to this diagnosis?" "What was the alternative?" she retorted. "The assessment is accurate. I am background stimulus. I am the wallflower while men like you manipulate the world." His subsequent query cut through her defenses. "Then what is your purpose here?" The question rendered her mute. "Because I will not be negated any longer," she whispered. "I am tired of being erased." She had exposed her core vulnerability, expecting empathy. She received a chilling smile instead. It was devoid of warmth, containing only the keen, authentic pleasure of a successful diagnosis. "Excellent," he stated. "The first piece of accurate data you have provided. Now complete your meal. The schedule is rigorous." The following 2 weeks would not be an education. They were to be a deconstruction. Adrian had no intention of teaching her social graces. His objective was to raise her defense mechanisms to the foundation and reconstruct her psyche. He began with her physical posture. "Your shoulders broadcast apology," he noted after her 10th pass across the room. "You ambulate as if seeking permission to exist." "Desist." He silenced her rationalization. "You make yourself smaller. Your gait is submissive. You are attempting to disappear." She adjusted, aligning her spine. "An improvement," he allowed. Now ambulate as if you own this territory, not as if you are an intruder. She started to inhabit her own physical form. Emily walked to the point of exhaustion as her morale degraded, but Adrian remained relentless. A constant observer, he refined each motion, pushing her beyond all established limits. A transformation began to take hold. After 1 week, her posture conveyed authority, her gaze no longer averted. Next to his formidable presence, she was no longer a diminished reflection. In the second week, he shifted his focus from her physical form to her vocal delivery. The other guests will perform a psychological dissection, Adrian warned on the 8th evening. Their questions will be scalpels, their compliments a neurotoxin. He coached her to deflect without revealing injury. How is that accomplished? Through drills, I will assume the role of Nathaniel's mother. The suggestion was so bizarre she almost laughed. Would you prefer I simulate Nathaniel? The absurdity of it made it acceptable. Instantly, Adrian's physicality shifted, his posture relaxing into a synthetic grace, his expression warm but his eyes cold. The timbre of his voice changed, taking on a refined, aristocratic modulation. Emily, my dear, what a surprise. I was not aware you had acquired a new preoccupation so quickly. Tell me about your associate. The mimicry was so precise it caused a visceral reaction in Emily. The saccharine venom was intimately familiar. He is more than an associate, she countered, her tone level. We are involved. Charming. And his line of work? The Moretti name is unfamiliar. Is he in finance? Emily tensed. This was the exact line of attack she most dreaded. How could she obscure Adrian's profession without resorting to overt falsehood? He is involved in private enterprise, she says, measuring each word. Adrian, maintaining his character, allows a predatory smile to form. So deliberately vague. His net worth must be substantial to maintain your interest. You always had an eye for men who offered security. The insult is a calculated strike, intended to frame her as a mercenary. But instead of reacting to the toxin, Emily deploys a new tactic. She mirrors his smile. Actually, she counters, her voice a study in composure, I believe you will find that I am the one who provides the security. Adrian's operational sphere presents a unique variable of chaos requiring a stabilizing agent. With that, the conditioning exercise ceased. Adrian's authentic smile manifested, a stark, chilling indicator of earned respect. Progress, he stated. You absorbed the stimulus and inverted the dynamic. You established your function as essential, not ornamental. This protocol will be applied to every social assault they deploy against you. Their sessions were a regimen of psychological stress inoculation. Adrian embodied every antagonist, Nathaniel's parents, invasive guests, even a projection of Nathaniel. He systematically exposed her to all conceivable social aggressions. Each subtle slight, every covert maneuver designed to classify her as an anomaly. Emily, in turn, perfected the counter-response. She operated not with aggression, but with a clinical certitude, forged from surviving threats far more potent than these provincial elites. 3 days prior to the event, a foreign entity met Emily's gaze in the mirror. She stood in her suite, encased in a gown of Adrian's own design. It was a midnight blue silk that adhered to her body like a secondary integument. She observed a different subject, one who occupied space with intent, whose posture conveyed increased stature, and who appeared congruent with a figure like Adrian Moretti. You are calibrated, Adrian's voice interjected from the doorway. Emily pivoted. He appeared as an apparition in a perfect tuxedo, the archetype of billionaire composure. Yet the look he directed at her was the variable that compromised her emotional regulation. A subtle increase in affective temperature, something analogous to pride. "Are you certain?" she inquired. "My analysis is conclusive." He traversed the room, halting before her to manipulate her necklace, a gold chain with a pendant mirroring the ring she had given him. "Emily, direct your focus here," she complied. "When you enter that venue," Adrian stated, his tone a low-frequency vibration, "every individual present will perceive what I perceive, not Nathaniel Ashford's discarded asset, not a subject defined by past trauma. They will observe the subject who has already secured victory." Emily's respiration faltered. "What is the basis for your certainty?" "Because for 2 weeks I have observed your metamorphosis into her." He withdrew, and the hypnotic state dissolved, his cool, effective shield returning to its default position. Yet Emily registered a seismic internal shift, a potent and irrefutable sensation. This presented a complication. She was forming a trauma bond. Not the contract, the security, or the identity reconstruction. She was developing an attachment to the individual who acknowledged her when she was invisible, who forced her beyond her established limits, who identified the dominant archetype within her before she could. This was a catastrophic variable because in 3 days, she would perform her role at the wedding, and then their arrangement would terminate. Adrian would revert to his own ecosystem, and Emily would be reintegrated into her former life. But now she was shadowed by the eidolon of this other self, functional, fearless, and perhaps entirely artificial. "The vehicle is scheduled for 3, Adrian said, already turning toward the exit. "Adhere to the schedule." He vanished before she could formulate a response. Emily confronted the mirror again, dissecting the new data, the apparel, the posture, the confidence worn like personal armor. She had solicited Adrian's training to survive in his world. She had never calculated the psychological cost of forced extraction from it. The day of the wedding commenced under an oppressive gray sky, forecasting a storm that failed to manifest. Emily was conscious before dawn, her visceral state a knot of dread, not for sustenance but for confronting the Belmont estate in 6 hours with Adrian Moretti. She observed the sterile ceiling of her suite, a space that felt more like a performance set than a living quarter, and attempted to regulate her breathing. Her phone vibrated, a communication from Maya. "Initiation time. You are prepared. Report all data immediately upon conclusion." Emily replied with only a thumbs-up icon. Verbal formulation felt like an insurmountable task. She willed herself from bed and into a shower of punishingly high temperature. She allowed the water to inflict a burning sensation, the sole stimulus that felt authentic on a morning constructed of artifice. 20 minutes later, wrapped in a luxury towel, she found Claudia waiting with a garment bag, her expression indicating Emily was already behind schedule. "The mister requires your presence downstairs in 30 minutes, Claudia stated, deploying the bag. "The grooming team arrives in 10. I can perform the task myself. Mr. Moretti mandates it." A predictable assertion of control. The subsequent 3 hours devolved into a disorienting sequence of strangers physically manipulating her. The hair technician constructed an elaborate French coiffure she would not retain in memory. The makeup technician lectured on color theory and the specific undertones of her skin. Not one of them inquired about her psychological state. Not one of them asked if she was experiencing terror. None perceived the subject beneath the layers of pigment positioned at the edge of a psychological precipice. When they concluded, her own face in the mirror was that of an unknown individual. The woman reflected was expensive, polished, someone who belonged among the affluent, not an administrator in an office permeated by the scent of stale coffee and stagnation. Then came the dress. The midnight blue construct Adrian had deemed optimal was virtually molded to her form. While its neckline was conservative, the fabric moved like liquid shadow, a silent indicator of its extreme cost. She was observing, mesmerized, when his figure materialized the reflection behind her. He had replaced his casual morning attire with a charcoal gray suit so precisely tailored it resembled polished armor, forged for the impending social conflict. His dark hair was styled back, his mandibular line sharp and defined. The instant their gazes connected in the glass, a bioelectric current passed through her. "You are optimized," he stated softly. "My presentation suggests an imminent panic attack." "That is all so accurate," he conceded. He reduced the distance between them, his scent enveloping her, an olfactory signature of deep woods and a specific category of threat. "They will not perceive that. They will only perceive the narrative we have constructed." Emily pivoted to face him directly. "And what if I experience a mission failure?" "You will not. You cannot have absolute certainty." "I do." Adrian's hand rose to her necklace, his thumb brushing the charm as it had 3 days before. But this tactile contact felt significantly more charged. His fingers made contact with her collarbone, and her respiration ceased. "Emily, focus on me." She complied with the directive. "You have undergone 2 weeks of preparation for this event," Adrian said, his voice a deep, anchoring frequency. "You know the protocols. You are fluent in their communication style. You know precisely how to induce a lifetime of regret in Nathaniel Ashford. You must simply access the memory that this is not a performance. You are merely reverting to the subject you were before you began to self-doubt." "And who is that subject?" "One who does not require his validation." The words impacted her like a key finally engaging a corroded lock. She had to accept his hypothesis. She required this reflection to be authentic. She required the practiced confidence to be an integrated part of her psyche, not merely a borrowed defense mechanism to be relinquished post-operation. But this close to Adrian, registering the sheer force of his attention, Emily could no longer differentiate what was authentic. "The car is present," he announced, stepping back, and with that, the potent field between them collapsed. "Are you prepared?" "No, not in any capacity." "Yes," Emily lied. The hour-long transit to the Belmont property was conducted in total silence from her, while Adrian managed communications in what she identified as Italian. His cadence was transactional, concise, and conclusive as he resolved matters of a clearly confidential nature. Over the preceding 2 weeks, she had maintained a deliberate policy of not inquiring into the specifics of Adrian's business. This was not due to a lack of curiosity. That was a low-level hum beneath her awareness. It was a cognitive understanding that the more data she acquired, the more traumatic her extraction would be, and that extraction was a non-negotiable term of their contract. The estate emerged abruptly from the landscape, an artifact from a different era. Flawlessly manicured grounds enveloped a primary structure that appeared transplanted from the European continent. A procession of high-value vehicles was already moving up the drive, their polished surfaces reflecting the waning daylight. Emily's digits began to tremble. Adrian terminated his conversation, his focus immediately reorienting to her. Breathe. I am breathing. No, you are approaching a state of hyperventilation. The two are not synonymous. He reached across the console, his hand covering hers. It was the first instance of such contact outside of their scripted rehearsals. His palm was warm, his grip firm but not constrictive. Emily, this is the protocol. We enter, we are observed. We deliver the precise performance they require, and then we exfiltrate. Nothing further. What if they inquire about us? About the nature of our attachment? We will provide them with the truth. Emily could only stare back. The complete truth? No. Only the fragments necessary for our objective. Adrian's thumb traced a slow, methodical arc across her knuckles, a gesture that was equal parts sedative and subtly proprietary. We met via mutual contacts. Our association has lasted several months. We value our privacy. If they persist, you redirect. You have drilled these scenarios. A simulation in a sterile environment is nothing like the reality, with an audience anticipating my failure. Then you will not fail. The directive was so absolute, so simplistic, as if she could simply elect not to fracture upon seeing Nathaniel, to disregard the artifice of the identity she was wearing. But Adrian grounded her with his touch, his gaze projecting a certainty entirely absent from her own psyche. Emily could only capitulate. Agreed, she whispered. Agreed. The car door opened. Adrian emerged, then extended his hand in a perfectly executed gesture. She accepted it, not from necessity, but for the integrity of the scene they were constructing. Or so she rationalized. They entered a theater of the privileged, a maelstrom of formulaic praise and simulated affection. Emily recognized the archetypes from her time with Nathaniel, a world of social functions where smiles functioned as sophisticated masks. Their ascent precipitated an immediate fracture in the room's social climate. Auditory exchanges ceased as every gaze reoriented. A low-frequency murmur spread among the attendees, intensifying into the psychic pressure of 100 observer pairs. A silent tribunal convened to assess, to categorize, and to pass sentence on her. Her somatic response screamed for withdrawal. Instead, she elevated her chin, her grip on Adrian tightening with clinical pressure. Internally, the energy shift was a palpable force. The surveillance was now undisguised. From the collective, a vaguely familiar female from Nathaniel's lineage, presumed to be an aunt, advanced with a smile radiating pure hostility. Emily, a most unexpected but welcome development. We were not anticipating your attendance. The subtext was a blade's edge. Your role was that of the absent griever. Emily replicated the woman's insincere facial expression. It was impossible to be absent. My history with Nathaniel does not preclude my wishing for his happiness. The woman's focus shifted to Adrian, her inquiry a measurable force. And your designation is? Adrian Moretti, he responded, his handshake conveying a practiced authority derived from innumerable such encounters. A pleasure. As she processed the tactile contact, her expression modulated from simple curiosity to acute suspicion. Moretti, that designation is familiar. It is a common cognomen. And your association with Emily? We were connected via mutual associates, Emily interjected, the pre-scripted datum delivered with reflexive smoothness. Several months prior. How fortunate. We shall anticipate your presence inside. The proceedings commence in 20 minutes. The woman pivoted without awaiting acknowledgement, already vocalizing to her companion. Emily initiated a controlled exhalation. That was within tolerable parameters. Merely the preliminary phase, Adrian stated quietly. The true diagnostic is your reaction to him. Emily had suppressed that visual data, refusing to simulate his appearance after 3 months of communication silence, his potential state, or his potential to perceive her as non-existent. They entered the primary chamber, a space architecturally engineered for aesthetic perfection. Floral arrangements cascaded beside precise rows of white seating, all illuminated by a matrix of candle flames. Attendees occupied their designated spots, their subdued vocalizations resonating in the cavernous space. Emily and Adrian selected positions near the rear, a point of strategic observation, not a sanctuary for concealment. This was another of Adrian's operational tenets. The ceremony initiated with logistical precision. The auditory stimulus intensified. The bridal contingent, attired in lavender, commenced their procession. Then he materialized. Nathaniel, positioned at the altar, appeared exactly as documented in her memory. Tall, with the blonde hair and blue eyes of synthetic perfection, displaying a smile engineered for contractual and political victories. An aesthetic deception for any who had not analyzed the man beneath. That same smile was now directed down the aisle, expectant. A physiological knot formed in Emily's abdomen. It was not grief. That emotional reservoir was depleted months ago. It was the cognitive dissonance of observing a historical image of an individual now classified as a stranger. The bride appeared, eliciting a well-simulated gasp from the groom. She was the archetype of dynastic selection, in a garment with a cost likely exceeding Emily's total student debt. She advanced down the aisle with tactical fluidity, her smile a fixed burnished feature. Upon reaching Nathaniel, he grasped her hand with the mien of a subject securing his ordained future. Perhaps he was. Adrian's hand located hers beneath the fabric of her dress, his digits interlocking with hers in a manner that felt unnervingly authentic. She reciprocated the pressure. The ceremony was a predictable protocol, orthodox, formal, and replete with vows of perpetual attachment from two individuals finalizing a corporate-style merger. The officiant spoke of commitment of electing love on a diurnal basis. Emily analyzed whether Nathaniel and his bride had ever executed a genuine choice, or if their lives were scripts authored by progenitors who prioritized optics over affection. When the call for objections arose, a dense silence permeated the space, weighted with all the data that would remain unvoiced. Emily offered no input. 20 minutes later, the performance concluded. Nathaniel kissed his new spouse. The room produced a wave of applause as the couple receded to the sound of a string quartet performing a theme from some obscure cinematic work. As he passed their row, Nathaniel's eyes located hers with startling, calculated intent. For a single cardiac cycle, objective reality paused. His gaze locked with hers, then shifted to Adrian, and a fissure appeared in his perfected facade. Emily was not in a state of collapse, but was instead an icon of controlled composure. A novel response, shock, possibly respect, registered on his features. Then the mask was re-engaged as he smiled at another attendee. Emily resumed respiration. Adrian murmured, "Is your homeostasis stable?" She was in a state antithetical to it. The reception was in a ballroom that dwarfed the chapel, a hall of crystal chandeliers, vistas of manicured grounds, and service plates costing more than her monthly lodging fees. The room was a monument to wealth, all white and gold, a persistent broadcast of social standing. Emily and Adrian were assigned to a peripheral table, removed from the central activity but fully observable. This was another of Adrian's strategic placements. Every action was a calculated maneuver. Their table companions were unknown subjects who offered perfunctory nods but initiated no verbal exchange. Emily was grateful for the silence. Her capacity for pretense was fully expended, her emotional reserves depleted. A sequence of culinary courses began to arrive. Emily merely displaced the food on her plate, her heart rate elevated, acutely aware of the inquisitive gazes from adjacent tables. "They are observing us," she said in a low tone. "Correct," Adrian replied, sampling his wine with practiced equanimity. "That is the objective." I believed the objective was to demonstrate to Nathaniel my indifference. "It is, and that demonstration requires you to command their focus. Let them speculate on your current identity, on my identity, and on the purpose of our presence." He lowered his glass, his eyes making direct contact with hers. "Shall I articulate their current cognitions?" She was uncertain she wished for that data. "They are witnessing a reemergence. They observe you with an unidentifiable male, and it compels them to reevaluate all prior assumptions about you." His voice was a low-frequency vibration, meant only for her auditory sensors. "They are entertaining the significant probability that Nathaniel Ashford committed a strategic error of catastrophic proportions." Emily wanted to interpret the murmurs as validation of her newfound agency, not her audacity. But a life conditioned to the periphery made this sudden focus feel like a psychological experiment. The music signaled the first dance, a meticulously rehearsed exhibition by the bride and groom. Then the floor became a public space. Music flooded the immense room. Human forms began to oscillate. From her position, Emily observed, attempting to suppress the tremors in her hands. Adrian rose and extended his hand. "We are now dancing." It was a directive, not a query. Emily looked at the man who had spent 2 weeks reconstructing her psychological architecture and experienced a spike of anxiety. This was not a variable in the plan. "Our drills were conducted in your apartment. This is the public demonstration. Now you will dance with me." She took his hand, aware that refusal would generate a greater social disruption. He guided her to the floor with innate grace, positioning them at the precise center, a stage built for maximum visibility. His hand rested on her lower back, hers upon his shoulder. In an instant, they were in motion, swaying to a melody she could not process over the percussive sound in her own ears. "You are exhibiting muscular tension," Adrian observed. "I am experiencing extreme fear of this environment, of being observed, of—" She truncated the thought, "of beginning to believe this performance was reality and forgetting its fabricated nature." He drew her fractionally closer, eliminating the space until his body heat was perceptible through her dress. "Do you know my assessment of you?" A subject engaged in a high-stakes simulation. "I see an individual whose performance integrated into her reality approximately 3 days ago." His voice was low and intimate, a vibration that resonated through her. "You are awaiting external validation to become the person you already are, Emily. That validation is not a receivable object. It must be seized." Before she could formulate a response, she saw them, Nathaniel and his bride, dancing in excessively close proximity. She attempted to divert her gaze, but Nathaniel's eyes found hers once more, maintaining contact for a fraction too long. "He is observing," Adrian said softly, "acknowledged. What is your affective state?" Emily had to pause and conduct a genuine internal query. Weeks prior, his stare would have psychologically fractured her, leaving her catatonic on the polished floor. Yet tonight, stabilized by Adrian's physical contact, insulated by a high-cost textile barrier, the sensation was alien, an emotional vacuum where a response should have been. No triumph, no gratification, no rage, only a profound, placid stillness. The sensation is equivalent to observing a stranger, she concluded. Adrian's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist. Optimal. After 2 more musical pieces, Emily signaled her departure. She excused herself and retreated to the terrace, into the sharp autumn atmosphere. The grounds, illuminated by an ethereal glow, offered a synthetic tranquility. She had less than 30 seconds of this reprieve before a stimulus from her past materialized, and it was not Adrian. Emily? Upon hearing her name, she faced him. Nathaniel re-manifested after a 3-month absence. His presentation, his cadence, the architecture of his artificial smile, a warmth that failed to reach his affectless eyes, was unaltered. "I will concede I did not predict your presence," he began. Emily maintained his gaze, her expression perfectly neutral. "Your invitation compelled my attendance." "Affirmative. I merely hypothesized. The prospect would be aversive." "And what logic would support my missing this event?" Her question appeared to disrupt his equilibrium. "Emily, I was the agent who terminated our engagement. I selected an alternative partner. Most females in your position would have incinerated this summons. But I am not a typical female." "Precisely." His gaze reflexively scanned the ballroom, locating his new mate. "No, you are not. You are an anomaly." "My thanks." That was not a compliment, he clarified. A somatic chill response traveled down her spinal column. Then what was its function? He closed the distance, his voice modulating to a low frequency. "An observation? You arrived with an unknown subject in an expensive garment projecting an affect of indifference to our shared history. It is irregular." "Irregular?" "Yes. I have concerns for your well-being, Emp. I will not permit you to make a catastrophic error rooted in psychic pain." The diminutive M, his designation for her. It registered with the force of a somatic impact. She had suppressed the memory of his talent for concealing contempt within false empathy, his method of weaponizing concern. "Your sentiment is noted," Emily stated, her vocalization flat. "But my condition is stable. In fact, it is optimal." "And you? You present as acutely desperate to manipulate the narrative. I only wish to help you avert a negative outcome." "A negative outcome? Adrian Moretti?" Nathaniel articulated the name as if it were a toxin. "Are you aware of that subject's identity, or his capacity?" "I am fully cognizant of who he is." "Then you are aware he is not a subject for involvement?" "Emily, your profession is a paralegal. You are ill-equipped for a liaison with a man of his profile." The behavior was classic Nathaniel, a manifestation of his certainty and perceived authority over her life choices that was almost laughable. The man she had nearly bonded with on the day of his bonding was lecturing her on her deficient judgment in social selection. "You are correct," Emily conceded quietly. "I lack the equipment to manage a man like Adrian, but perhaps that is the central variable. Perhaps for 2 years, I was the exact female archetype you required. Secure, predictable, and utterly conventional. Observe the result. So I am now testing a different behavioral pattern. I am selecting an alternate trajectory, and I do not require your validation." His facial expression became a rigid mask. I am merely attempting to assist you. No, you are attempting to assuage your own guilt because my existence did not destabilize upon your exit. You required me to fracture. You needed my distress signals to validate your own self-worth. Emily reduced the distance, her focus locked on his. But I did not disintegrate. I am present. I am intact. And that reality is systematically deconstructing you. That is a fabrication. It is the objective truth, and for that I am genuinely grateful. Had you not abandoned me, I might never have perceived how I diminished myself to fit within your operational sphere. The degree of self I sacrificed to become your idealized partner instead of my own entity. So, thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you for selecting another female. You performed a significant service for me. As she pivoted to depart, his hand secured her arm. Emily, wait! Release her! Adrian's voice bisected the ambient noise with surgical precision. He had materialized from the shadows, his approach so swift, he must have observed the entire interaction. His grip on Nathaniel's wrist was not aggressive, but a calibrated pressure that demanded immediate compliance. We were merely communicating, Nathaniel stammered, his complexion losing color as he struggled to project calm. And at this moment, the communication is terminated. Adrian's vocal volume was low. It did not require amplification. The menace was encoded in each word, in his physical interposition between them. You should return to your mate. She is likely questioning your location. Nathaniel appeared poised to argue, but registered the expression in Adrian's eyes. A nonverbal promise of extreme violence, and he de-escalated. He recoiled, adjusted his suit, and manufactured a taut smile. Enjoy the remainder of your evening, he said to Emily, then turned and retreated rapidly. As the crowd absorbed him, Emily's emotional regulation finally collapsed. Adrian was instantly present, his hands a stabilizing force on her arms. Are you injured? He inquired sharply. No, I am functional. He simply startled me. He initiated contact. His rationale is inconsequential. Adrian's tone was level, yet infused with a virulence Emily had not previously detected. It was the sound of possession, of predatory protection, and of finality. No one is authorized to touch you without your consent, ever. She looked at him, the agent of a total fabrication, a pact now feeling perilously authentic as the barriers around her psyche began to fail. Adrian, we are exfiltrating, immediately. What? The function has only just commenced. The function is concluded. His tone permitted no negotiation. You made your appearance. You demonstrated your recovery from him. You confronted Nathaniel Ashford with unvarnished data. The objective is complete. He took her hand, already moving toward the exit. We are leaving before I engage in an act that will become public record. Emily offered no resistance. She allowed him to guide her through the corridor, past oblivious attendees and the vacant, polished environment. They were in the vehicle in under 5 minutes, and as they departed the Belmont property, Emily could finally execute a full respiratory cycle. Through the rear window, she watched the estate recede to a point of light, a reality that was almost hers, and felt the final psychic tether to Nathaniel Ashford sever. It was terminated. Genuinely terminated. She had survived the event. Adrian was on his phone, speaking a clipped, transactional Italian. Emily observed him in the low light, noting his rigid jaw, a muscle twitching at negative input, the sheer force projected in every gesture. This was the authentic Adrian Moretti, not the patient instructor of the past 2 weeks, not the charming figure from the ballroom. This was the architect of empires, with foundations built on fealty, fear, and calculated risk. Emily had consented to one night within his ecosystem, except it no longer felt like a single night. It felt as though she had traversed a boundary from which there was no return. She had requested he make her formidable, and he had complied. But she never calculated that thriving in his world meant she could never regress to her own. 30 minutes later, the vehicle halted outside his structure. He terminated the call and faced her, his expression a neutral mask. "Thank you," Emily whispered, "for the totality of your efforts, for withhold your gratitude for now." An element in his voice caused her heart to accelerate against her ribs. "What is your meaning?" Adrian merely observed her for a long, waited interval, an unidentifiable emotion surfacing deep in his eyes. He then exited the car and held the door for her. "Come upstairs," he instructed. "A debriefing is required." Her hands remained unstable as they ascended in the elevator. She clasped them together, watching the floors pass, hyper-aware of his silent, potent proximity. The atmosphere between them had shifted, now charged with a component absent just 2 hours prior. Or perhaps it was a constant, and she was too focused on survival to detect it. The elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse. He entered first, depositing a $5,000 jacket onto a chair. Emily followed, feeling profoundly dislocated in a space that was familiar but had never been integrated. "A drink," Adrian offered, already positioned at the bar. "I do not believe that is advisable." His question was rhetorical. He poured 2 glasses of a dark amber fluid, crossed the room, and placed one in her hand. "Sit down before you lose your balance." Emily complied, grateful for the directive to cease feigning composure. 6 hours, the footwear left a somatic ache in her bones. A more acute pain emanated from her scalp where pins secured her hair. But these were only physical echoes of a profound psychic exhaustion, the type produced by observing a former mate bond with another while maintaining a facade of serenity. She ingested the drink. The liquor's thermal effect was a welcome, clarifying sensation. Across the room, Adrian gazed through the panoramic windows at the city's illuminated grid. At some point, he had loosened his tie and the collar of his shirt. Emily's focus briefly settled on the exposed skin of his throat before she redirected her gaze. "Your performance tonight was magnificent," he remarked, his voice low, his back still toward her. "My sole contribution was willing myself not to lose consciousness." "You stood before the individual who fractured you and declared yourself repaired. You navigated the dance floor while a room of predators anticipated your collapse. You maintained your posture when every impulse indicated flight." He turned, making direct eye contact. "That is the antithesis of nothing, Emily." "It felt simulated, as if I were a phantom occupying a foreign vessel." "That is because you are still awaiting external validation to exist." Adrian drank, his gaze holding hers with palpable force. "When will you accept that the woman you have been for 14 days is not a performance? This power is not a resource I have lent you. It is you. It is your baseline state before Nathaniel Ashford conditioned you to reduce your presence." Emily set her glass down, her hand exhibiting a tremor. "There is no way you could know that." "I can, because for 2 weeks I have observed you conducting an internal war. I have seen you apologize for occupying space, for formulating a thought, for respiring as if your existence were an imposition. and repeatedly I was forced to remind you that you required no one's sanction, that you were already a complete system. He relocated, sitting in the coffee table before her. Do you perceive the distinction between yourself and Nathaniel's new mate? Emily could only produce a negative headshake, her vocal function suspended. She possesses an intrinsic sense of value, he elaborated. Not from superiority, but because no one ever programmed her to believe she was inferior. That state, Emily, is accessible to you. You can dominate this environment, but you must first cease petitioning it for permission. His words registered with a physical force, cracking a structure sealed within her since Nathaniel's departure. Lacrimation threatened, but she suppressed it. I don't know the methodology, she whispered. You do. Tonight was the proof of concept. Now you must merely continue the protocol. Adrian reached out, and the simple act of adjusting a stray lock of hair behind her ear felt so profoundly transgressive. It violated every parameter she had established for him. His touch persisted, a thumb outlining her jawline, causing a cessation in Emily's breathing. They were at a point of critical instability. This proximity, the potent energy between them, existed outside their agreement and was tied to her 14-day regression into dependency on a man meant only to be an asset. His phone's vibration shattered the state. Adrian retracted his hand, his expression occluding, the shift from accessibility to impenetrability occurring in less than a second. He observed the screen, his jaw tensing. I must respond to this, he stated, already rising. Do not move. He vanished into his study, a torrent of clipped Italian audible before the door sealed. Emily was left adrift in the vast, silent residence, her pulse accelerating as she attempted to analyze the recent event. She drained her glass, the final measure, a welcome, caustic solace. She rose, removed her footwear, and moved toward the guest quarters. It was imperative to remove the garment, cleanse her face, and release her hair. She had to locate herself once more, even if that identity was now profoundly altered. The guest suite presented as a haven of cold, sterile precision, precisely as she had left it. A foreign figure regarded Emily from the full-length looking glass. This woman retained her composure, a grace capable of dominating any formal gathering. Yet a new intensity emanated from her eyes, a quality resembling resolve. Her fingers were at her gown's zipper when a shout breached the penthouse's purportedly sound-dampening walls. Emily froze, her hands suspended, and focused her hearing. The vocalizations continued. It was Adrian's voice, unrefined and authoritative, using the same rapid Italian from his calls. This instance, however, held a different quality, a rough, strained timbre that suggested desperation. Without consideration, Emily exited the suite and proceeded noiselessly toward Adrian's office. The door was slightly ajar. Through the opening, she observed him pacing, phone clamped to his ear, his unoccupied hand raked through his hair, a gesture of deteriorating self-control. He issued a sharp directive into the phone. Emily could not decipher the words, but she recognized the tone. It was the sound of a major error unfolding. He concluded the call by slamming the device on his desk, remaining braced against it, vibrating with fury. Every impulse demanded she retreat, return to her room's silence and feign ignorance. Instead, the door yielded to her touch. Adrian's eyes locked onto hers. For a brief moment, she witnessed something feral in his expression, rage, torment, and a darkness that chilled her deeply. Then the facade of composure returned. My directive was for you to stay downstairs. There were raised voices, and you decided to approach the disturbance. I believed you might require. Her sentence evaporated. I am uncertain what? A hollow, sharp sound escaped Adrian's throat. What I require is for my instructions to be obeyed. He continued, certain matters are interred for a purpose not intended for excavation. He paused, implicitly commanding she retire for the evening. Still she pressed, asking what was wrong. His reply was a stern warning against any further transgression. Adrian, I stated it is of no consequence. His voice became glacial. This pertains to business. Do not observe me as if we are... The sentiment expired on his tongue, the statement suspended, the space between them. As if we are what? She whispered. He then fractured the delicate premise between them. As if any element of this is authentic. The words were a calculated blow, yet she held his stare, unblinking. It feels authentic, she replied. He turned toward her. You desire a rescuer, and I was naive enough to let you assign me that role. Adrian began to pace, creating a physical divide between them. This is not your reality. You've faced a complication. I offered a remedy. The contract is fulfilled. We are concluded. She echoed his terminology. The remedy is complete, her tone devoid of emotion. Precisely. You attended the wedding. You achieved your resolution. Our transaction is finalized. Is that all? That is all. He would not meet her gaze, his focus fixed on a remote, vacant spot past her. The room is yours for the night, but I require you gone by morning. So I am to resume the life I had previously. The definitiveness of it was overwhelming. You're ejecting me, he attempted to recontextualize. I am terminating our contract. She rebuffed his characterization. Is that the term for this? Because it presents very much like you are discarding me now that I am an encumbrance. You are not an encumbrance. This was always a temporary measure. And then she presented her own assessment. Deceiver. The single word penetrated his defenses. You're deceiving me or yourself, but you experienced something tonight. He became a bastion of denial. I experienced nothing. He intensified the injury, implying she was projecting emotions born of vulnerability. Then came the final assault. I will not be the subsequent man to destroy your life, Emily. The sheer malice of it arrested her breath. She remained there, a monarch he had elevated, only to watch him incinerate her domain. And then she stabilized. You are correct, she said, her tone disquietingly placid. You are far worse than Nathaniel. He, at least, was candid in his perfidy. With that, she pivoted and departed. She reached her room, her face an unreadable mask, closed the door, and disintegrated into countless fragments. She grieved for the potential future lost with Nathaniel. She grieved for the spectral version of the girl she was just 14 days ago. But her most profound sorrow was for Adrian, the engineer of her own rebuilding, who had raised his work the instant their controlled environment ruptured. Sleep was unattainable. She remained awake in the darkness. Then, at approximately 2 or 3 a.m., she registered his footsteps halting outside her door. He stayed there for a considerable moment, then proceeded onward. A minor fracture in his armor. She contemplated if his night was as torturous as her own. Dawn broke, and Emily packed with mechanical precision. She abandoned the designer gowns and the high-value jewelry. She took only her own possessions, the ring Adrian had loathed included. As she was departing, Claudia materialized, immaculate as always. Mr. Moretti has secured a car for you. Emily's declination was severe and final. No, I will use the subway. He was insistent. She met the housekeeper's eyes. Kindly inform Mr. Moretti their transaction is complete, and that she requires nothing more from him. Not waiting for a reply, she exited. The 40-minute rail transit was an indistinct haze. She observed her reflection, witnessing the entire arc of her 2-week transformation from obscurity to power and back to nullity. Her former apartment was an untouched relic of her previous self, a disorganized monument to a lesser existence occupied by the specter of 3-week-old takeout. It felt like an attempt to inhabit a skin she had already outgrown. She dropped her bag and sank onto the sofa. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. It was Maya, requesting a complete debriefing. But how could she articulate the preceding 14 days? How does one compress? I entered a pact with a hazardous man, conquered my trauma, and was then psychologically dismantled by him into a message. After a few aborted efforts, she simply wrote, "It is concluded. I will elaborate later." She passed the remainder of the day attempting to reoccupy her former life, but it was no longer a fit. The laundry was processed, the kitchen sanitized. Her laptop display was illuminated, a testament to a workday she lacked the fortitude to commence. Her thoughts were a constant loop of Adrian, his gaze that held her like a prized object, then dismissed her like a contaminant, and the stark, inescapable reality of her own capitulation to him. As twilight permeated the room, a quiet insight crystallized. The Emily she had been was gone, not because he had fractured her, but because she had finally perceived her own resilience. She could not construct a life centered on a man who had so completely sealed her out. It was time to erect her own empire. Employing the very tools Adrian had provided her, she would begin by demolishing her past. 3 years lived as a non-entity. As she composed her resignation, the piercing tone of a secure line shattered the silence. An unexplainable impulse compelled her to respond. "Emily Carter." A strange male voice was on the line. "Who is this?" "My name is Marco. I am an associate of Adrian Moretti. He instructed me to establish contact." Her heart felt as if it stopped. "For what reason?" "A situation has arisen. He was adamant you be alerted. Individuals may pose questions regarding last night. If they do, you are to call this number and disclose nothing." "What type of situation?" "I am unable to provide specifics, but Mr. Moretti has designated your safety as his foremost priority." Her safety? A profound, invasive chill spread through her. What is that intended to convey? It means maintain awareness of your environment. If you are trailed or approached, you contact us. Is that clear? Marco, what is truly transpiring? But the connection was terminated. She sat on her sofa, utterly motionless, attempting to comprehend the devastation of that one communication. Your security is his highest concern. This was not over. The lethal reality Adrian occupied, one that incited irate Italian disputes at 2 a.m, had just ensnared her. A single night in his sphere, and she was now classified as collateral. Her hands began to tremble, but it was not from fear. It was a lucid, acute rage. Adrian dismisses her, declares their contract fulfilled, and then sends his subordinates with veiled warnings. He had positioned her as a participant in a contest without ever outlining the parameters. If he presumed she would hide in her apartment awaiting his next directive, he was grievously mistaken. Emily took her keys and departed with a solitary, distinct purpose. No strategy, no prepared words, only a destination. She proceeded to the Crimson Lounge. It appeared lessened in the unforgiving light of day, divested of its nocturnal mystique. She noticed the same hostess as before, whose eyes dilated in recognition. Miss Carter, I require a word with Adrian. He is not present today. That is irrelevant. Inform him I am here. I regret that is not feasible. Inform him, Emily stated, her vocal tone shifting to one of calculated force, that if a meeting is denied, I will proceed to the ballroom and publicly inquire what manner of enterprise requires issuing safety advisories to its associates. The other attendees would surely find it compelling. The hostess's professional composure remained, yet a micro-expression of alarm betrayed her assessment. It was a tacit confirmation that the subject was not posturing. One moment, she conceded, retreating behind the doors. Emily waited, her cardiac rhythm accelerating, anticipating rejection. 5 minutes later, the original security escort reappeared and gestured for her to proceed. The corridor to Adrian's office presented as a disorienting psychological space she simultaneously recognized and found entirely alien. She had traversed this passage once before, a subject in a state of desperation with no remaining assets. This time she was motivated by a powerful reactive aggression. The guard knocked twice, then receded into the hallway. Emily bypassed protocol, opening the door herself. Adrian was silhouetted against the large window, a figure of authority surveying his territory, mirroring his posture from the previous night. He remained facing away. Your presence here is a miscalculation, he said, his voice devoid of inflection. I received a communication from an individual named Marco, referencing threats to my security. I presume you can provide clarification. He conveyed all necessary information. That is an evasive response. It is the only one you will receive. Emily moved across the room, positioning herself directly behind him, close enough to observe his fatigued reflection. The man's physiognomy showed signs of profound exhaustion, as if he'd engaged in a prolonged internal conflict. Disclose what transpired at the wedding, she demanded. It is of no concern to you. Marco's communication suggests otherwise. Marco was exercising caution. Seize this, Adrian. She repositioned herself into his direct field of vision, compelling eye contact. Do not categorize me as a fragile object requiring insulation from reality. For 2 weeks, you conditioned me to be fearless, to command deference, to maintain my position. You cannot now order me back into a passive role. A muscle contracted in his jaw. You are not cognizant of what you are requesting. Then facilitate my understanding. I am unable to. Why? Because your state of ignorance is the sole variable ensuring your safety. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped her. A paradoxical statement from the man who introduced me to this chaos. You made me a component in your strategy, Adrian. The moment you escorted me to that wedding, the moment you tutored me on social integration, you made me a participant. Do not feign that this dismissal is for my protection. You are protecting yourself. You are correct. Adrian's voice was a resonant whisper. My actions are self-preservational because allowing you greater proximity would be a fatal error. Why? Because any individual I permit into my sphere is either eliminated, vanishes, or endures a life of regret. Because this world, which you perceive as glamorous, deconstructs people, and your deconstruction has been sufficient for a lifetime. His admission impacted her with the severity of a physical blow, inducing a momentary respiratory paralysis. She observed him then, her perception penetrating the facade of his attire and cultivated menace, past the psychological barriers he had erected. She perceived the individual who had assisted a stranger out of a shared sense of invisibility, the man who had prepared her for conflict because, on a subconscious level, he was still engaged in his own. What occurred at the wedding, she repeated, her tone softened by this new psychological insight. Adrian turned away, placing his palms against the window's cool surface. He remained there for a long, weighted interval, enveloped in silence. Then he disclosed the facts. An attempt was made on my life. The statement remained suspended in the space between them. What? Not during the ceremony. Subsequent to our departure, a vehicle followed our own from the property. 3 assailants. They would have succeeded if my driver had not perceived an anomaly. His eyes met hers in the dark reflection. The call I received upon our return. It was from my security chief. He confirmed subjects were in custody. He also confirmed the bounty on my head has risen to a level that is encouraging reckless behavior from hunters. But you are unharmed. I am not wounded. You are not wounded. There were no casualties, he articulated, the words laced with a potent bitterness. But the client who commissioned the assault is now aware of my presence there, and they are aware you were with me. This classifies you as leverage. A cold neurological deficit radiated through Emily's legs. Leverage, a point of psychological pressure, a tool to be broken to affect him. Adrian finally pivoted to face her directly. That is the reason for Marco's call. It is why I sent you away. Because from the moment you entered my world, a target was placed on your back, and I cannot... His voice fractured. I cannot secure you when my own proximity is the primary vector of your danger. So my protocol is to return home and hope I am forgotten? Correct. And if I am not, you will manage the situation? Emily could only shake her head in disbelief. Do you truly believe I will remain in my apartment awaiting your resolution? After the conditioning you provided, do you think I can simply revert to being invisible? That is precisely my expectation, he countered. Because the alternative scenario involves you being caught in the ensuing conflict, and I will not permit that outcome. You lack the authority to make that determination for me. I possess that authority when it is my conflict that generates your risk. Emily stepped closer, near enough to observe the raw exhaustion in his eyes and the tension in his neck, the immense willpower maintaining his composure. Answer one question, she said, her voice lowering. When you dismissed me last night, was it because our transaction was complete, or were you already attempting to remove me from the line of fire? Adrian did not respond verbally. A verbal response was unnecessary. The answer was evident in his non-verbal cues. I am remaining, Emily declared. I am not returning to my apartment to seek refuge. I am not erasing the past 2 weeks. You inducted me into this world, Adrian, and I am now a factor in the problem. Emily, no. You will not dismiss me for my own supposed benefit. You will not assess me as too weak for the subsequent phase. I am standing here with full knowledge of what they attempted against you, and I am not retreating. So you will either provide a full briefing or I will exit this office and locate an alternative source. For a long moment, Adrian merely stared at her, seemingly stunned into a state of complete silence. Then, the ambient emotional tone shifted. A smile formed on his lips. It was the familiar, incisive grin from their initial meeting, now infused with an unexpected warmth. You are profoundly illogical, he observed. I was instructed by an expert. He gave a slight shake of his head. Yet Emily perceived the psychological fortifications around him begin to erode. She could nearly visualize the frantic internal calculation, weighing the high risk of her involvement against the consequences of her exclusion. At last he spoke. If I disclose everything, if I immerse you in the depths of this, there is no possibility of return. You comprehend this, correct? I do. You will possess knowledge that makes you complicit. You will be as culpable as I am. Good. In 2 steps, Adrian closed the distance between them. He raised a hand to her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, mirroring the previous night's gesture. This is your final opportunity to withdraw, he murmured, his voice a low vibration. Emily held his gaze. I am not withdrawing. Then you will remain in my immediate proximity because the situation is about to become exceptionally dangerous and I require assurance of your preparedness. I am prepared. That remains to be seen. His hand lowered as he moved to his desk, lifting a phone to place a call. Upon connection, a stream of rapid Italian emerged from him, the tone one of pure, unadulterated command. He terminated the call, his eyes locking with hers. Marco is collecting your belongings from your apartment. You will be quartered here until this is concluded. Adrian, this is not a negotiation. If you are participating, you adhere to my protocols. Rule 1. You do not leave my visual range until I can guarantee your security. Emily suppressed the impulse to object. She wanted to assert that she required no protector, that she was self-sufficient. But she was entering an environment she could not fully process. She had no data on who desired Adrian's death, their motivations, or their potential actions, should they locate her. Thus, she gave a single decisive nod. Understood. Adrian observed her for another second, then continued. You inquired about the wedding. The truth is, I have been engaged in a conflict with a rival organization for almost a year. Standard disputes, territory, operational methods. But it has escalated. They began targeting my personnel, so I retaliated. Last night was a communication from them, demonstrating that no venue is sanctified, not even the wedding of a senator's daughter. So they are now aware of me. They are aware I had a companion. Whether they have identified you or understand your significance to me is uncertain, but I am mitigating all risks. Your significance to me. The phrase remained in the air, more weighted than any direct confession. What is our next action? Emily asked, breaking the dense silence. Our next action? We conclude this. I will identify the man who issued the order. I will make him comprehend the consequences of touching my assets, and I will terminate this war before there are additional casualties. How? Adrian's smile became feral. By executing my primary skill set, by making individuals regret the day they ever misjudged my capabilities. He moved toward the door, then paused, glancing over his shoulder. This was a clinical threshold. Adrian's question was less an inquiry than a final exit point before delusion became fact. For Emily, the choice prompted a psychological inventory. The constricting apartment symbolizing her past life, the firm where she endured 3 years of anonymity, a constructed identity she never truly inhabited. This was weighed against the raw data of the last 2 weeks of genuine existence, of observing Nathaniel with neutrality, and of the bond with a dangerous subject who perceived her true self. Her affirmation, I'm certain, terminated her former identity. Taking his hand was a conscious entry into a conflict zone. The command center, as he termed it, was a subterranean world beneath the Crimson Lounge, a space she hadn't conceived of until he guided her past a secured service elevator. The chamber was a sterile construction of concrete and steel, its walls a live data mosaic of security feeds displaying a dozen urban vectors. 3 men stood within, their discussion ceasing as Adrian entered with Emily. Marco separated from the unit, his demeanor showing concern for Emily and deference to his superior. "Boss," he stated, "we have a development." Adrian's response demonstrated chronic stress acceptance. When is that not the case? He approached the primary display. "Analyze this for me." Surveillance from the Belmont estate, last night approximately 20 minutes post-departure. Marco engaged a function, and the image focused on a parking sector. 3 male subjects are observed near a black sedan, engaged in discussion. One produces a mobile device, makes a brief call, then the unit enters the vehicle and departs. It's the same surveillance team. We tracked their vehicle to a warehouse on the east side. They had vacated by the time our assets arrived. But you acquired something. We verified their presence and recovered this. Marco provided Adrian a manila folder containing surveillance photographs. The data suggests they've been observing you for at least 2 weeks. Adrian began processing the images, his expression neutral as he reviewed the numerous photographs. Emily could only discern fragments. Adrian exiting the Crimson Lounge. Adrian entering his vehicle. Adrian approaching his residential building. Adrian with her. There were at least 4 images of them together, en route to the wedding on the Belmont property, dancing, and 1 invasive photograph taken through his penthouse window showing them in his living area. On the initial night, the information registered as a visceral shock. They were observing us. They were observing me, Adrian corrected, his tone incisive. You were incidental. The outcome is identical. Emily moved closer, observing over his shoulder. In every photo, she noted her own oblivious state, laughing, talking, immersed in his environment, unaware of the constant monitoring. What was the duration of this? Sufficient to profile your entire life, your residence, your occupation, your network. Marco's tone was both apologetic and factual. My apologies, Miss Carter. We were unaware they had expanded their operational scope until we acquired these. Identify them, Emily demanded. Who is directing this? The 3 men exchanged a look. Adrian closed the folder and faced her. His name is Vincent Calabrazzi. He controls the East Side, gambling, extortion, and illicit import-export operations. We had a long-standing truce. He controlled his territory. I controlled mine. It was a stable system. Adrian's jaw muscle tensed. 6 months ago, that accord dissolved. One of his units encroached on my territory, began pressuring assets under my protection. I communicated that this was unacceptable. He communicated his indifference. So the situation deteriorated. To what degree? Individuals were harmed. Assets were destroyed. They violated established protocols. Adrian made direct eye contact. I will not misrepresent my role in this, Emily. I have retaliated against Calabrazzi's operation and done so forcefully. But his actions are more pathological. He now believes the only path to victory is to make it personal, targeting me at a wedding, a location I deemed secure, filled with civilians and political figures. Adrian's voice became devoid of affect. It represented a total violation of established codes. Unwritten rules existed that were inviolable, and this man had systematically dismantled them. The realization unsettled Emily as she attempted to reconcile the subject before her with one who spoke of territorial conflict and blood-pact rules. What is your subsequent action? She asked, her voice quiet. To terminate it. Adrian's gaze shifted to Marco. Do we have a confirmed location on Calabrasi? He has remained elusive, utilizing a series of safe houses vacating by dawn, but we are confident about tomorrow night. Marco displayed a new image on the monitor. A lone warehouse in a defunct industrial park. Major shipment is arriving. High-value cargo he will want to supervise personally. Our intelligence places him at that location between 8 and midnight. Is this source credible? 100%. He's one of Calabrasi's own lieutenants, disillusioned with the current leadership. Adrian examined the low-resolution photograph, his cognitive processes evident. What is his estimated manpower? We project 10, perhaps 12, excluding the security for the shipment. Will be numerically inferior. We are always numerically inferior. That has never been a limiting factor. A predatory expression formed on Adrian's lips. Prepare all personnel. I require full tactical loadouts, non-lethals where viable, and surveillance on all egress points. If Calabrasi attempts to flee, I must be alerted before his hand touches the exit. And Miss Carter? Emily's voice intersected the briefing, arresting Adrian's command. I will be present. 4 sets of eyes converged on her. Adrian's command persona fractured, replaced by pure disbelief. That is non-negotiable. You said I was a component of this. That does not mean I remain in your secure location while you resolve my conflicts. That is precisely its definition. No, it means I determine my acceptable level of risk. She crossed her arms, her gaze a challenge he could not dismiss. You are confronting the man who targeted me, the obsessive entity who has shadowed us for 2 weeks. I have a right to observe the resolution. You have a right to your life, which you will lose in a firefight with professional killers. Then teach me to survive. For a protracted, tense moment, Adrian merely stared. He then glanced at Marco. Secure the room. Marco's team departed without a sound, the door sealing behind them. The resulting silence was a palpable pressure. Emily. Adrian's tone was deceptively placid. I understand your need for participation. I know you feel entitled to some form of justice or closure or whatever you hope to gain. But this is not the wedding. This is not a gala where a verbal slight is the most severe injury. There will be trauma, potentially fatalities, and my focus must be on neutralizing the threat, not protecting you from ordnance. I comprehend that. Do you? Because my assessment is that you view this as a game with no understanding of its permanence. The statement impacted her like a physical force. Her former self would have submitted, apologized, and retreated. But 14 days in his world had forged a new psychological resilience. She would not yield. I am not treating this like a game, she stated quietly. I am treating it as the consequence of my own decisions. I chose to locate you. I chose to be your associate at that reception. I chose to be here rather than flee. And I am choosing to see this to its conclusion. Not for stimulation, but because being a passive observer while you assume the risks is an identity I reject. This is not your conflict to wage. It became my conflict when he acquired those photographs. When Calabrasi designated me as the weapon to be used against you. Emily reduced the distance between them close enough to see the deep stress indicators on his face. You cannot protect me through seclusion, Adrian. You can only protect me by empowering me. So I am requesting it. Empower me. Adrian's eyes closed briefly. For a moment, he appeared older than his 35 years, burdened by an immense cognitive load. When his gaze met hers again, his expression was a conflict between concession and respect. "You will not abandon this course, will you?" "No. Not even if I informed you it was the single most self-destructive choice you could possibly make." She detected a faint smile as he shook his head slightly. "Understood. But you will adhere to my directives precisely. No deviation, no independent action. You are a non-combatant. Is that clear?" "Perfectly. And when I give the order to evacuate, you will evacuate. No debate, no hesitation. You will be gone. Is that our agreement?" Ambivalence showed on Emily's face. Every impulse urged her to refuse, to vow she would never leave him. But his expression confirmed this was the sole condition, the price of entry. "Agreed," she finally exhaled. Adrian raised his phone. "Marco, return and locate a specialist who can teach survival skills in the next 6 hours." The subsequent 6 hours were the most grueling of Emily's life. The trainer Marco provided was a woman named Sophia, a compact figure of lethal composure who could neutralize a threat with a glance. She did not question the compressed timeline for an accelerated course in self-preservation. She simply commenced. They began with fundamentals, body grounding, utilizing her center of gravity and redirecting an opponent's force. Sophia was brutally efficient, offering no praise, only persistent, sharp adjustments. When Emily impacted the mat for the 10th time, she received no sympathy. "Again," Sophia commanded, her voice flat as Emily fought for oxygen. "He secures you from behind. Your response." Emily's mind scanned for the correct sequence. "Lower your mass, rotate into him, strike with an elbow." It was a clumsy execution. "Too slow," Sophia said, parrying the anticipated blow. "You are signaling your intent. He will preempt it and neutralize you. Feigned vulnerability is a tactical asset deployed only at the point of engagement." This mantra was drilled into her for a continuous 3-hour period. Upon cessation of training, Emily's physique displayed extensive contusions and widespread muscular pain. Nonetheless, a rudimentary tactical instinct had been instilled. Counter-maneuvers against restraints, identifying points of leverage, actions designed to create temporal windows for evasion. She acknowledged the inadequacy of this training, yet recognized its value. At this juncture, Adrian appeared, his expression neutral. He solicited an evaluation from Sophia. Her learning curve is steep. In a genuine confrontation, she would be overwhelmed, but she may now possess the capacity to withdraw. Sophia provided Emily with a water bottle. "Rehearse these techniques until they are autonomic." With that, she departed. Emily consumed nearly half the contents before addressing Adrian. "Provide an honest assessment. Will I be a tactical vulnerability tomorrow?" "Statistically, yes, that is the highest probability outcome." He rapidly closed the distance between them. "However, I prefer a quantifiable liability under my observation to an unquantifiable one beyond my control. This proximity ensures my immediate intervention if circumstances deteriorate. That offers minimal comfort." It was not intended to. Adrian then executed a gentle, dissonant gesture, brushing hair from her face. This recurring, intimate act elicited a significant tachycardic response, overpowering her physical pain. "Emily, you retain the option to withdraw. Remain here during the Calibra operation. No one would assign fault." "I would assign it to myself." "For what reason?" "For demonstrating the rational sense to avoid a lethal scenario." "Because I will no longer remain passive while my risks are shouldered by others." Emily lowered the bottle, her gaze fixed upon him. My entire existence has been a study in self-effacement, a series of decisions designed for anonymity. The result? A fiancé who found me utterly inconsequential, a career in which I was functionally invisible, a home that functioned as a liminal space, not an actual life. And you believe immersion in this turmoil is the solution? I believe selecting my own peril is preferable to a mandated security from individuals indifferent to my desires. Emily reduced the proximity, his body heat becoming a palpable stimulus. You were the catalyst for this. You demonstrated I could manifest a presence rather than apologize for existing. Do not now demand I revert to that state simply because it is the safer alternative. Adrian's hand returned to her face, his thumb stroking her jaw with a tenderness that contradicted his evident internal turmoil. This course of action will result in your death, he stated quietly. Not if you instruct me in survival. I have been attempting to. You exhibit non-compliance, then enforce compliance. The tension between them became acute, saturated with unspoken dynamics. Emily observed a clear internal conflict in his expression, the protector archetype vying with his recognition of her defiant agency. The impulse for protective distancing fought the need for physical intimacy. The latter prevailed. Adria eliminated the final space between them, his mouth claiming hers. The act lacked gentleness. It was a forceful, possessive assertion conveying the controlled violence fundamental to his character. Emily reciprocated with equal intensity, her fingers clenching his shirt as a profound somatic reaction overtook her, akin to a deprivation response being met. Separating, breathless, Adrian placed his forehead against hers. This constitutes a severe error in judgment, he gasped. Perhaps you should exit this area immediately before the situation escalates. An uncharacteristic laugh, devoid of its usual coolness, escaped him. The point of no return has been passed. Indeed, it had. They remained in this precarious state, suspended between their established identities and their imminent transformation. A mobile phone alert broke the tension. He withdrew, his professional demeanor re-engaging instantly as he consulted the device. Marco is presenting the finalized tactical plan. We are required for the briefing. Acknowledged. Despite residual sensory data and a sustained cardiac response, Emily deliberately focused her cognitive state. What information must I have? Her briefing encompassed the entire operational structure. For the following 2 hours, they reviewed Marco's meticulously detailed plan. The target, an East Side warehouse, was selected to mitigate non-combatant involvement, though it possessed multiple egress points. Calabrese was confirmed to be present for a shipment arriving at 8. Adrian's strategy was ruthlessly efficient. Establish a perimeter, eliminate all exfiltration routes, and dictate the terms of engagement. The optimal scenario involved Calabrese recognizing his tactical disadvantage and capitulating. The probable scenario, however, was a violent exchange. Emily's role was defined with stark simplicity. Remain in a vehicle with Marco, concealed, and not to exit without a direct order. This was Adrian's non-negotiable condition. She was permitted to observe the conflict but was prohibited from entering it. Lacking alternatives, Emily consented, though she held the firm belief that initial engagement invariably invalidates strategic planning. The evening became a period of heightened tension as Adrian's operatives assembled, each embodying the deadly competence forged by extensive combat experience. They conducted equipment inspections while discussing contingencies Emily could not fathom. Adrian served as the organizational nexus, the calm center of the operation, leveraging their collective goal to forge a cohesive unit. He projected an aura of success, assuring them they could neutralize Calabresi's operation and emerge unscathed. Emily struggled to internalize his confidence. At nightfall, she was instructed to rest in his residence. The attempt failed. In a guest room that felt like a luxurious confinement cell, she could not suppress her escalating anxiety. At midnight, she abandoned the effort and found Adrian in his study, exhibiting the same signs of sleep deprivation as herself. "You are unable to sleep?" he inquired, his focus on the document. "My attention is fixed on tomorrow. A common condition among us tonight." He set down the file and indicated a chair. "Specify the source of your distress. It is diffuse. It is specific." The recent physical intimacy was a palpable, unspoken factor. The awareness that in less than 12 hours, the man she was bonding with would enter a lethal engagement. The myriad ways the night could conclude in disaster. "What is the protocol if Calabresi does not comply?" Emily asked. "We will compel his compliance." "And if that fails?" Adrian's expression became rigid with determination. "Then he will be neutralized within the warehouse." The finality of his statement should have induced terror, a reminder of his capacity for extreme brutality. Instead, a profound exhaustion overcame Emily. "Have you ever taken a life?" she inquired softly. Adrian met her gaze, and a significant silence ensued. "Yes." "How many times?" "Is the quantification relevant?" "It might be." He leaned back, his demeanor becoming highly clinical. "I have terminated 4 individuals. 3 were direct lethal threats to myself or to persons I was protecting. The 4th harmed a minor under my protection and believed his status provided immunity." His vocal tone was devoid of emotion. "It provides no satisfaction. I feel no guilt. Their choices created the conditions, and I chose to intervene. This is the reality I inhabit. And tomorrow, if Calabresi necessitates a violent response, I will take all necessary actions to defend my people, to defend you. Afterward, my life will proceed as it always has." Emily processed this, struggling to reconcile the man who had kissed her 6 hours prior with the subject now dispassionately discussing homicide. The 2 personas seemed mutually exclusive, yet coexisted. Adrian was a paradox, protector and predator, mentor and executioner, the individual who perceived her fully, and the one who could end a life without hesitation. She was becoming lost to his contradictory aspects. "I don't know how to be someone who accepts this," Emily admitted. "Acceptance is not required. You must only determine if you can coexist with me in light of this information." Adrian rose, moved around the desk, and knelt before her, holding her gaze. "My warning that this environment destroys individuals was not hyperbole, Emily. To choose this is to choose its totality, the violence, the perpetual threat, the consequences. I cannot promise it will become easier. I can only promise the truth of its cost." "And what has it cost you personally?" The inquiry had a visible impact. His jaw tightened before he responded, his voice low. "Every potential version of myself that might have existed. Every person I might have loved in another life." His gaze found hers again. "I ceased grieving for him long ago. My current state is the final iteration. This is the only identity I possess." Emily reached for his hand, weaving her fingers through his. "Then instruct me," she breathed, "on how to exist in your world without sacrificing my own internal self." He replied, "I am not certain that is achievable." Her answer was immediate. "The possibility can only be determined through experimentation." Adrian leaned in for a kiss, this one qualitatively different. softer as if committing sensory data to memory. He pulled back, forehead to hers. "Attempt to get some sleep," he whispered. "The day ahead promises to be taxing." Her inquiry hung between them. "Will you remain here with me?" She sensed his defensive posture, a reflexive impulse to rebuild the barriers she'd dismantled. Yet an internal resolve seemed to crumble. With a soft sigh, his hand enclosed hers more firmly. "Yes," he uttered, the affirmation barely a whisper. "I'll remain." They lay in the guest quarters, fully dressed and motionless upon the covers, his arm a secure pressure as her head rested against his chest. It was the most conventional act they had shared, and thus the most intensely personal. With all pretense gone, they were simply two individuals in a catastrophic situation, seeking a moment of tranquility before the conflict. Emily must have lost consciousness, for she awoke to the gray light of dawn and the frigid, empty expanse beside her. Adrienne had departed. A note lay on the nightstand, penned in the familiar, sharp script from his office. 7 p.m.? Be punctual. She clutched the paper for a weighty second before compelling herself to get up. The subsequent hours passed with agonizing sluggishness. Emily attempted to eat, but managed only a piece of dry toast. She looked through her phone, seeking a diversion, but her thoughts were a whirlwind of dread. By evening, her anxiety had manifested as a slight, constant tremor in her hands. At 6:30, Marco arrived in a nondescript SUV. He uttered no words as he drove them silently across the city, moving east, where familiar avenues dissolved into strange industrial blight. As they entered the warehouse district, the setting sun painted the sky in harsh streaks of orange and red. The target building loomed before them, identical to the reconnaissance images. A vast industrial shell flanked by vacant lots and chain-link fences. No lights were visible inside, but Emily could discern the massive shapes of vehicles stationed by a loading bay. Calabresi's team was present. Marco guided the SUV into the darkness cast by derelict containers about 200 yards away. The position afforded them an unobstructed view of the entry while remaining concealed in shadow. 2 other sedans were already there, Adrian's operatives awaiting the command. "Where is he?" Emily's voice was a tightly stretched wire. "South entry, with Sophia and 3 others. Once the goods are inside, they will secure all exits." Marco passed her a small radio with an earpiece. "You monitor everything, but you do not speak unless a life is at risk. And you recall our agreement. You will not exit this vehicle regardless of what unfolds." With trembling fingers, Emily attached the device. Her reality contracted to a crackling stream of terse, tactical phrases, Adrian's low commands, position confirmations, and the faint noises of a unit preparing for engagement. Then his voice emerged from the static, unnervingly clear. "Status." One by one, his operatives responded. Emily tallied 8 distinct voices, not including Marco. A team of 9 versus an estimated 10 or 12 of Calabresi's men, plus any others within. The numbers were grim. They were knowingly entering a conflict where they were at a disadvantage. Just then, headlights sliced the dusk as a large truck came near. It reversed to the loading dock with a practiced, unsettling swiftness. 6 individuals emerged from the building to start unloading its contents. "We have visual on the target," a voice reported on the radio. "Calabresi is observable on the east side with 3 others." A frantic rhythm began in Emily's chest. This was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was happening. Through it all, Adrian's voice on the communications remained a pillar of immense calm and absolute authority. Hold position on my command. No one acts until I give the word. The unloading proceeded normally. Calabrese observed from a distance, completely at ease, as if it were a routine evening. There was no hint of alarm, no sign of the imminent ambush. Then, in an instant, the entire situation shattered. One of Calabrese's men glanced at his phone, his expression twisting into a mask of pure terror, and he began to shout. Calabrese's head whipped around, his eyes piercing the gloom. He understood. They were exposed. "Fall back!" Adrian's voice was no longer composed. It was like fractured glass. "Everyone, evacuate now!" A gunshot tore through the night. Emily did not see who fired first. She only witnessed the darkness erupt into a swarm of muzzle flashes as her entire world descended into utter chaos. Through the windshield, Adriana's team burst from their cover, their weapons firing in a frantic effort to control the mayhem. Near the south entryway, Adrian was a ghost, his motions a fearsome dance as he neutralized unseen hostiles. Sophia moved with him, protecting his flank. Abruptly, a large group of Calabrese's men poured from the warehouse in a coordinated attack. Marco threw the SUV in gear. "We are going immediately." "But Adrian!" "He is capable of handling himself. Our mission is your protection." "No." Her hand reached for the door handle. "I will not desert him. Miss Carter, you gave your word. And I am aware of what is more important." Emily threw the door open, exiting the SUV before Marco could stop her. She heard his enraged yells behind her, but she was already sprinting into the gunfight, into the very center of the conflict toward Adrian. It was an act of pure insanity, a self-destructive urge. She was violating every instruction he had ever issued. But to flee felt like a profound betrayal. She could not bear to see him fall from the safety of a car. Preserving her own life by sacrificing the one individual who meant everything to her was not an option. She ran barely 30 yards before an arm wrapped around her. Her training activated before her mind could process the attack. Just as Sophia had instructed, she dropped her weight, twisted hard, and drove an elbow backward. She felt the solid impact, heard a pained grunt, and was let go. She pivoted, prepared to attack again, but stopped cold. A young enforcer for Calabrese, barely 20, held a pistol aimed at her chest. "Don't move," he gasped, stumbling from her blow. In that moment, all of Sophia's lessons vanished. There was only the weapon. Her hands rose in surrender as one thought reverberated in her mind. This is how it happens. It's over. 30 seconds after the most foolish decision of my life. Adrian's voice sliced through the bedlam like a razor. "Let her go." He appeared from the shadows, a streak of lethal motion she recalled from the wedding. His firearm was fixed on her assailant, his entire being projecting controlled aggression. But his expression was altered. The detached composure of a killer had vanished, replaced by a raw, undisguised fear in his eyes. "Stay away, Moretti," the young man threatened, his own voice unsteady. "I will shoot. I swear." "No, you will not." Adrian's tone was incredibly steady. "The second you try, your existence ceases, and unlike her, your absence will not be mourned. You don't know that. I know you, Danny Russo. You joined Calabrese 8 months ago. Your mother resides in Queens. Your sister recently enrolled at NYU. Adrienne took a single, deliberate step forward. "If you shoot, their lives are forfeit. Do you grasp the meaning of my words?" Danny's gun lowered slightly. Emily saw terror spread across his face as the truth dawned on him. He had not seized a mere bystander. He was holding Adrian Moretti's entire purpose for living. "Allow her to come to me," Adrian commanded, his voice a quiet menace. "Do that, and you depart from here alive. Get in your vehicle, drive to your mother's home, and inform her that you are done. Find a different profession, one where you don't perish on the street for a single poor choice. If she goes, Calabrese will execute me." Calabrese is about to face more pressing issues. But I will not forget this. I will not forget that you decided to be intelligent. That holds some value. The impasse lasted for 10 seconds that stretched into an eternity for Emily. The firefight continued around them, a mere backdrop to Adrian's finger on the trigger and the wild thumping in her throat. Then Danny's pistol dropped. "Go," he whispered. She did not pause. She covered the few feet separating them, and Adrian pulled her behind him, his weapon aimed at Danny until he vanished back into the turmoil. "What in God's name were you thinking?" Adrian's question was sharp in the quiet. "I was unable to leave you. Your instructions were to remain in the vehicle. I am aware. They might have killed you." "I understand that." His grasp on her arm was like steel as he pulled her toward the arriving SUV. "This is concluded. Now." "What of Calabrese?" "That is Marco's concern. You made your decision, Emily. This is the result." They had almost reached the car when Sophia's voice came through the comms. "Adrian, we have a problem. Calabrese is escaping through the north exit if he reaches his transport. I am going in." Adrian stopped her. "Stand down." "Boss, if he escapes—" "I said to let him go." Adrian pushed Emily toward Marco and the SUV. "Get her out of here. Bring her to the penthouse. She is not to leave until I arrive." "And what about you?" Emily inquired. "I am concluding this matter." "Adrian, don't!" He was already moving away, walking back into the chaos that she had ignited. She tried to follow him, but Marco's arm intercepted her. "No," he stated, his tone final. "You have created sufficient trouble for one evening." His remark hit her like a physical blow. She allowed Marco to guide her to the SUV, her gaze fixed on the conflict-consuming Adrienne, and felt something inside of her break. The journey was a quiet torment, interrupted only by the dispassionate voices on the radio. Emily monitored Adrian's operational commands, clinical verifications of neutralized threats, secured perimeters, and egress plans. Then came Sophia's final transmission. Calabrese was mobile and had evaded them. The mission was a failure attributed to her intervention. Hostilities had ceased by the time they arrived at Adrian's building. The radio was silent. Marco entered the subterranean garage and disengaged the engine, and for a significant period they remained inert. "Is he functional?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "He persists. It is his nature." Marco's tone was maniac. "You must comprehend, Miss Carter. Your action was not merely impulsive. You forced Adrian to choose between the objective and you. You created a cognitive dilemma with no optimal outcome for him or the men who rely on his command." "I am aware." "Are you? Your actions suggest a detachment from reality, a failure to process consequence." Marco faced her, his gaze firm. "Danny Russo could have terminated you. Adrian would have terminated him. Subsequently, his mother and sister would be eliminated. All because a paralegal required a moment of self-actualization." A lacrimal response stung her eyes. "My intent was not—" Intent is irrelevant. Only outcomes matter. To function in this environment, you must accept that your choices have cascading effects you cannot predict. These effects impact unknown individuals, often with terminal consequences. For a second, a fracture appeared in Marco's composure. Adrian has an emotional investment in you beyond tactical reason. That does not grant you license to compromise everything due to oppositional defiance. He exited the SUV, leaving her in an auditory void. Emily remained, his words resonating in the quiet before she moved toward the elevator. In Adrian's absence, the penthouse was a sterile, expansive mausoleum. In her room, she disrobed and subjected herself to thermal hydrotherapy until her skin showed erythema. The sensory input failed to purge the intrusive visual memories of Danny's weapon, of the acute distress on Adrian's face, or of the decision matrix she had forced upon him. She was seated on her bed, wrapped in linen, when the front door audibly disengaged. Emily dressed in jeans and a shirt and proceeded to the main living area. Adrian was there, exhibiting physical indicators of acute stress. His shirt was torn, and a smear of foreign blood marked his sleeve. A minor tremor was visible in his hand as he poured a beverage. "Have you sustained injury?" she asked from the threshold. "Negative. The blood is not mine." He consumed the whiskey in a single motion and poured a second. His unit was secure. 3 members had sustained non-critical injuries. Calabrese was gone, but his infrastructure was neutralized. It was a tactical victory that secured an estimated 6 months of dormancy. "I express remorse," she whispered. "Do you?" Adrian turned, his eyes reflecting a dangerous internal state. "Is the remorse for the insubordination or for its consequences?" "Both. I am uncertain." She advanced into the room, the distance between them feeling like a chasm. "I am sorry for complicating things, for forcing your decision. I am sorry I defied you, but I would do it again." This was not conjecture. A falsehood, a hollow promise of compliance she could not honor, was available to Emily. Yet Adrian's gaze compelled a truthful disclosure. "Likely," she conceded. "If I perceived an imminent threat to you and an opportunity for intervention, yes, the action would be repeated." A harsh, atonal laugh escaped him. "You misapprehend effective intervention, Emily. You possess 6 hours of training and a martyr complex. That is not a combat strategy. It is a formula for self-termination with me managing the aftermath. I do not require your protection. That assessment is incorrect. That premise is the foundation of our entire arrangement. Your presence is a result of being collateral damage. Your survival is contingent on proximity to me." He struck the glass against the table, and it shattered. "But I cannot ensure your survival if you defy directives. I cannot shield you if you insist on moving toward a threat to display fortitude. I am not trying to prove a point. Then what was tonight? It appeared to be a performance, a stress test for this world, to negate the passive identity Nathaniel Ashford assigned to you." Adrian eliminated the distance between them, his gaze fixing her in place. "You require no validation from me, Emily. My assessment is complete. You exhibit courage, obstinance, and a need for significance so profound you will seek out harm to feel it. And that variable produces more anxiety in me than any threat Calabrese could devise." The subject's lacrimal response finally traced paths down her cheeks. "I lack the capacity to be otherwise. I am not requesting an alternate persona. I am requesting you trust that your existence is sufficient justification for your place here." You have had one since you sat in my office and articulated the feeling of being erased. Then why do I feel a persistent need to demonstrate my worth? Because Nathaniel conditioned you to internalize inadequacy. That passivity equated to non-existence. You are now engaged in a hazardous overcorrection. Adrian's proximity was close enough that she could feel his body's heat. Recklessness is not a prerequisite for being remarkable, Emily. Being authentic is sufficient. And if my authentic self is incompatible with this world, then that is a problem we will solve together. He initiated an embrace, holding her firmly enough that she could feel his cardiac rhythm. But you are forbidden from self-destruction in pursuit of a romanticized notion of this life. You are not permitted to expose yourself to harm based on a misinterpretation of my needs. My primary requirement is your continued biological function. All else is extraneous data. Emily pressed her face to his chest, the tears now a full catharsis, for the fear, for the night's potential outcome, and for the cognitive dissonance of loving Adrian while resisting his world's demands. I regret escalating the situation, she said through her tears. You did, but you also executed a successful escape maneuver from Danny's grasp. The elbow strike would have met Sophia's approval. His lips touched her hair. And your belief in my capacity to extract you is also a significant data point. Even though my presence was a protocol violation, they remained in the embrace for an extended period, a static unit within Adrian's ordered environment. He eventually created minimal distance to establish eye contact. These are the revised rules of engagement, he stated. You may exist in this world. You may stand with me, but you must comply with a stand down order. You must accept that my protecting you is not an assessment of you as weak. Can you agree to these terms? Emily processed the proposal, weighing the cost to her autonomy against the reality of his world. I can attempt to comply, she said at last. That is the sole requirement. Adrian's kiss was deliberate and prolonged, as if committing her sensory data to memory. He rested his forehead against hers in their established quiet ritual. What is the next strategic move? Emily asked. Regarding Calabrese. He now understands I will escalate to open conflict, that I will dismantle his organization until he either capitulates or flees. He will initiate negotiations within days. Adrian's tone was entirely pragmatic. He will require assurances. I will require your immunity. A deal will be made, and a version of normalcy will be reestablished. This was the operational rhythm of their existence. You applied force until one party broke, or both concluded that victory would be too costly. A truce would persist until the next agenda shattered the equilibrium. Emily contemplated this cycle of violence and negotiation. A temporary stasis she knew was inherently unstable. A flight response should have been triggered. Instead, she felt only profound fatigue. I question my psychological fitness for this, she confessed. I understand. If you choose to leave, I will not impede you. I will ensure your safety. I will inform Calabrese that you are no longer a factor. I can restore your prior life without conditions. Adrian's voice was uncharacteristically gentle. But my stated hope is that you will remain. Why? Because you serve as a baseline for an existence beyond mere survival. You perceive what lies beneath the aggression. In 2 weeks, you have become integral to my world. He pulled back for direct eye contact. I love you, Emily. The timing is non-optimal, but you requested the truth. And this is the truest data I possess. Emily's breathing hitched. Some part of her had hypothesized this, but the verbal confirmation fundamentally altered her perception of their shared reality. Subject Emily confirmed reciprocal attachment, identifying it as the core conflict. Affiliation with him required internalizing the inherent risks, moral ambiguities, and consequences of his actions, such as entities like Danny Russo. She expressed doubt in her capacity to bear this psychological load. He countered, suggesting shared responsibility. The burden would still be mine to carry. It is the cost of entry into your world. I must co-own the outcomes of your work, including the parts I find repugnant. After a significant pause, Adrian proposed a strategic alteration. Suppose we redefined the conditions. Specify your proposal. Imagine I withdraw from direct operational command. Subordinates would manage daily conflicts, removing me from immediate threat. A total disengagement is unfeasible. My obligations are extensive. Many depend on me. I can, however, create a barrier to insulate you from its harshest aspects. Emily merely watched him. You would attempt that. I would. For you, the attempt is worth making. He framed her face with his hands. I cannot guarantee a total metamorphosis or that nights like this are eliminated, but I can promise a life where they are anomalous, not standard, where you are not forced to select between your affection for me and your own identity. And should it fail if you cannot disengage, then we confront it jointly, as we have every other obstacle. Adrian's smile was fractured, showing a vulnerability she hadn't witnessed. I have no precedent for this, Emily. I am improvising a solution, as are you, but I am committed to trying if you will reciprocate. Emily's thoughts returned to her state 3 weeks prior, a non-entity believing that to be her fate. She considered her current self fortified, bolder, still defining her limits but willing to test them. Then she envisioned the woman she could become by staying, creating a future with the man who acknowledged her when she felt negated. This course would be arduous, perhaps the most difficult challenge of her life. But within Adrian's embrace, his gaze her focus, Emily knew the outcome was already determined. Her choice was made the moment she advanced on that warehouse. Very well, she murmured. We'll proceed. The profound relief on Adrian's face was almost physically destabilizing. He kissed her once more, a measured symbolic promise, and Emily submerged herself in it, envisioning a future they must construct from wreckage. It bore no resemblance to the idealized narrative she'd had with Nathaniel, lacking safety and assurances, but it would be theirs, and it would be tangible. Perhaps that was the only relevant factor. The following 3 months were a harsh education that anything of worth has its cost. As Adrian predicted, Calabrese initiated contact 4 days after their confrontation. A fragile detente was brokered over a fortnight of strained negotiations, a legal conflict more intricate than any corporate acquisition. Calabrese retained his domain, Adrian held his, and Emily was removed from play like a neutralized piece. The pact was solidified under the chilling prospect of mutually assured annihilation, a threat both parties considered credible. Adrian honored his commitment, pulling back his operatives. He assigned Marco the routine operations, reserving his elite for critical tasks, and pivoted his focus to legitimate ventures that did not require armed security. This was not a clean slate. Some evenings, he would enter the residence, a tempest of silent fury coiled in his posture. Muted Italian calls still emanated from his study, Discussions she understood were prescribed territory, yet it represented progress. Emily also upheld her promise. She accepted a role at a nonprofit for abuse survivors, applying her legal acumen to defend the forgotten. The work was punishing and the compensation was sparse, yet it held more substance than any brief she had ever prepared. She now gave voice to the silenced. She understood their trauma in a way impossible before him. After 6 weeks, she moved into the penthouse permanently. Claudia met the information with her typical rigid composure, though Emily once detected a faint smile when she endured a dinner with his lieutenants without incident. Maya remained watchful, but unbreakably loyal, a trait Emily valued highly. She supplied her best friend a carefully redacted story, a new partner, a swift romance, a complex profession, but it was effective. Maya only needed to see the look on Emily's face when she said Adrian's name to drop her questions. Certain territory is not meant to be explored. On her dresser, the grandmother's ring rested in its velvet box. She attempted to return the ring multiple times, but he invariably waved it aside. It was never about the ring, he stated the last time she offered. It is yours. Maybe one day you will give it to our daughter. That offhand mention of a child, of a future, registered with a physical impact. They hadn't discussed permanence, of a wedding, of family, of anything beyond the next emergency. Yet the notion now lingered between them, a silent, weighty thing. 3 months after the warehouse, she observed herself in the mirror of her new room. Their room, though, he kept a separate one for nights when sleep proved elusive. She stood sheathed in another gown he had selected, this one the color of a deep emerald, preparing for yet another society event she detested. This time, however, she was not performing to establish her value. It was simply a component of the life she had embraced. Adrian filled the doorway, already in a tuxedo looking impossibly polished. "Ready?" he asked. Emily faced him, turning from her reflection. It was the mayor's fundraising gala. Their absence would create gossip, and they now had a public persona to preserve, as his legitimate businesses depended on the city's influential figures. Adrian closed the space between them, drawing her into an embrace. "But if you genuinely cannot stand it, we will send our apologies and stay home." Emily weighed the option. She could call Maya, order food, and watch some forgettable program with a man who founded his world on terror, but treated her as if she were sacred. The second choice was infinitely superior to feigning interest in politicians, but she had come to accept a difficult truth these past few months. The correct path is often the most demanding one. Sometimes you simply must appear. "No, we are obligated to go," she sighed. "But you are buying me absurdly expensive wine for my inconvenience." "Done!" They were almost out the door when Emily stopped. "Adrian, yes, thank you for seeing me when I felt like a ghost, for showing me the strength I possessed, for loving me even when my own terrible judgments nearly destroyed us both." Adrian held her again, his arms a fortress surrounding her. "And thank you for having the audacity to walk into my office holding that ring, for being stubborn enough to stay when I tried to push you away, for loving me, knowing the entirety of what I am." Emily rose on her toes, shifting in his arms to kiss him. As they separated, she whispered, "We're a magnificent disaster, are we not?" "Completely," he agreed. "But we are our disaster. I can live with that. Good, because I have no plans to go anywhere." They departed the penthouse a unified front, Adrian's hand a stabilizing force on the small of her back as they proceeded to another performance. This time, however, Emily was not wearing a mask. She was exactly who she was meant to be, unbreakable, defiant, and still adjusting to a world that had nearly shattered her. She had weathered Nathaniel's betrayal. She had weathered her own lowest point. She had weathered Adrian Moretti's orbit and learned that love could cost you everything: peace, security, and a full night's sleep. But she also discovered she was more resilient than she ever imagined. Here, our subject Emily confronts the core doctrine of her new life: that to love someone is to accept every one of their fractured pieces. But first, she must endure the empty ritual of a charity function. Here, politicians make promises they will not honor. The wealthy write checks for tax incentives, and every person wears a mask of benevolence. Emily lasts 2 hours before she requires an escape. After detaching herself from an overly familiar city councilman, she finds a moment of quiet on a terrace. She is not, however, alone. Emily Carter. She turns to see Nathaniel, her ex-fiancé, looking polished, handsome, and soulless. "Nathaniel," she replies, her tone flat and cold. "How is married life?" He offers a dismissive shrug. "It is good." "Fine." He then intrudes upon her space, his concern so transparently false it is insulting. "I heard you were with Adrian Moretti. Is that a serious arrangement?" "It is," Emily confirms. He attempts a protective posture, saying, "You know the man's reputation," and with that, Emily demolishes his entire facade. "I know his reputation. I know precisely who and what he is. And he is my choice, the same way your wife chose you. I suppose we all just select the demons we are willing to live with." The blow lands perfectly. "Your concern is noted," she says, turning to depart before pivoting back to face him. "No, correction, it is not appreciated. You do not get to feign you care now that my life is improved. Your opinion on my partner does not grant you a vote in my decisions. I have found happiness, Nathaniel. Real happiness. If you cannot be happy for me, then at least have the decency to leave me in peace." She does not wait for his reply. She walks back inside, finds Adrian, and links her fingers with his. He gives her an inquisitive look. "Time to leave?" he murmurs. Way past time. They make their apologies and are gone within 10 minutes. The ride back to the penthouse is a shared, quiet interlude. Emily's hand on Adrian's thigh as he drives through the city. This is her world now, her life. "Nathaniel was there," she says, as they pull into the garage. "I know, I saw him observing you. Does it bother you that he was my fiancé?" Adrian kills the engine and looks at her. "Should it? I do not know. It would bother some men. I am not some men. And he is your past. You are with me. It is a non-issue." He then leans over the console and gives her a soft kiss. Besides, he adds, "I think we can agree you have made a significant upgrade." A genuine, full laugh erupts from Emily. "Yes, I think that is a safe assessment." Upstairs, the formal wear is removed, replaced by comfortable clothes as they unwind on the couch with wine and Thai takeout. Adrian insists this place has the best pad see ew in the city. The scene is one of surprising domesticity, a stark contrast to the violence that brought them together. But this is what constructing a life is. It is not a sequence of grand, dramatic events. It is mostly this: quiet nights, good food, and the easy silence between two people who chose each other against all logic. Subject Adrian initiated a conversation about their shared trajectory during a meal, stating, "I've considered our long-term prognosis." He then ceased his activity, focusing his attention on her fully. "My intention is to formalize our union through marriage." This declaration induced a state of acute cognitive suspension in Emily. Explain. The timeline is not immediate, but contingent on mutual readiness. My objective is matrimony. I propose constructing a domestic sphere exclusive to us. Procreation is an option should you desire it. To create an existence not founded on coercion, aggression, or the pathology of my previous life. This is a significant proposition, Emily. It is imperative you understand that my future-oriented projections center exclusively on you. Should this proposal induce fear, communicate it, and I will rescind the offer. However, if any part of you desires this, I require confirmation. Emily placed her utensil down, exhibiting a minor tremor in her extremities. She conducted a mental risk assessment, contrasting a life with Nathaniel, predictable, structured, leading to emotional stagnation, with a projected future with Adrian, perilous, unstable, yet authentic. This cognitive process clarified her self-concept. I desire it as well, she stated in a low volume. I consent to be your spouse, to build that existence. I accept all conditions, especially the adverse ones. A significant positive facial expression, likened to a sunrise, manifested on Adrian's face. He repositioned her onto his lap, their meal disregarded, engaging in prolonged physical contact as the sustenance cooled. We will commit innumerable errors, he vocalized near her skin, assuredly. We will engage in conflict and push each other toward psychological distress. That is my expectation, yet we will confront every challenge in unison. Affirmative, Emily pledged, her digits entwining in his hair, as a unit. That evening, no logistical details were discussed. No formal strategies were outlined. They remained in the conceptual stage of their shared future. 6 months later, Adrian initiated a formal betrothal, utilizing not an inherited artifact, but a newly acquired object. The object symbolized a future under construction, not a past that had been endured. Emily consented. A year passed before their nuptials, a private ceremony for a select group. The event excluded public figures or social elites, lacking any performative audience. Attendees were limited to Marco and Sophia, Claudia and Maya, and the few individuals comprising their true support system. The union was not without flaws. The warehouse incident continued to manifest in Emily's sleep state ideations. Adrian retained a latent capacity for destructive behavior. He made decisions with which she had to develop coping mechanisms. However, their interpersonal dynamic remained free of deception. They engaged in conflict when necessary, acknowledged their failings, and consistently reaffirmed their partnership, particularly when doing so was difficult. 2 years post-nuptials, Emily is observed with their offspring, Isabella, in the nursery. She reported feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of her life's transformation. Adrian was present in the doorway, displaying physical signs of exhaustion, though his demeanor suggested profound contentment. "Is the infant dormant?" he asked quietly. "At last. I suspect she inherited your oppositional nature. Our prognosis is poor." He approached, embracing both individuals. "What is your current state?" Depleted, sore, and utterly captivated by this small autocrat who has deprived me of rest, Emily directed her gaze upward at him. "And your state?" "I am terrified of causing irreparable damage, and deeply grateful for your presence as a mitigating factor." Adrian made contact with Isabella's forehead, then Emily's, in a gesture of affection. "My gratitude." "For what reason?" "For identifying a salvageable component of my character, for demonstrating the courage to remain despite my repellent behaviors, for co-creating this existence with me." His vocalization faltered. "For inducing the belief that I might transcend my history." With the dormant child between them, Emily initiated a kiss. Our rescue was mutual, Adrian. That is our function. They remained in that position, illuminated by a single light source. Emily's cognitions returned to the ring she nearly liquidated for subsistence. To the male, who perceived her resilience beneath her fear, to the series of high-stakes choices that culminated in this tranquil environment, a life beyond her previous projections. This reality did not align with a fantasized narrative. It was superior, it was authentic. And 3 weeks later, Emily discovered the velvet container on Isabella's furniture with a message from Adrian. For when her comprehension is sufficient to grasp the concept of self-determination, and she experienced a strong emotional release, knowing all prior adversities were justified, because they had constructed an entity that was structurally inviolable. They had established a legacy for themselves, their progeny, and the shared existence they were actively constructing. They had created a secure enclosure, and Emily Carter, who previously experienced feelings of non-existence and anticipated a life of insignificance, stood within that domicile with her selected familial unit and achieved a core realization that she was, with total certainty, fully and deeply perceived.
Here's the cruelest part of the whole story. Emily thought the mission was to make her ex regret losing her, but the real mission was to survive becoming someone new. That is the emotional trap. People think heartbreak stories are about getting even. They are not. They are about whether the wounded person comes out cleaner or more dangerous. And this story goes for the throat. Nathaniel loses Emily, but not in the way he expects. He expects tears, collapse, maybe a lonely apartment, and a ruined self-image. Instead, he sees a woman enter the ballroom like the past no longer owns her. Brutal. But pause the frame there, because the deeper damage is not his, it is hers. She learns that revenge does not feel as satisfying as fantasy promised. The man she once revolved around suddenly looks small. That is not triumph. That is disillusionment. Then the script twists the knife again. Adrian, the man who helped remake her, becomes the next test, because life loves irony. The person who teaches her not to accept crumbs is also the person most likely to hurt her if she confuses love with salvation. He sees her clearly, but clarity is not innocence. He protects her, but he also comes carrying a world that could swallow her whole. And that is the biggest life lesson in the entire story. Sometimes the person who changes someone's life is not sent to make it easier. Sometimes they are sent to force a decision. Stay small and safe, or become fully alive and accept the cost. The emotional genius of the story is that both characters are right and both are broken. Emily is right to refuse invisibility. Adrian is right to fear what his world can do to her. Nathaniel is not the final villain because by the end he is barely relevant. The real enemy is the version of life where people settle for being tolerated instead of being seen. So what remains after all the mafia smoke, the wedding drama, the gunfire, and the kisses? One line of truth. Winning is not making the ex jealous. Winning is looking at the old pain and realizing it no longer has the authority to name a person's future. That is why Emily's arc works. She does not just find love, she finds weight, presence, edge, choice. She stops asking for room and starts occupying it. And once a person learns that lesson, the world never gets the smaller version of them back.